The Team House with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey guys, this is episode 387 of The Team House. I'm Jack Murphy, here with today's guest, Randy McElwee. Randy served in 5th Special Forces Group. He is a veteran of Desert Storm. Also, some interesting special project missions that he did in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region. And a whole number of other things. Martial arts plays a big role in his life. He was a part of bringing combatives to special forces. He did some cross-training with 3rd Ranger Battalion after the Black Hawk Down or Operation Gothic Serpent. And was also a team sergeant not once but twice, which is super rare and really cool. And today he runs a jiu-jitsu business, a number of different businesses, around martial arts. So, Randy, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Randy, tell us a little bit. I always ask everyone this. They're the regular people who watch the show are probably sick of me, but the origin story. If you tell us a little bit about what your upbringing was like and how that took you towards military service.
Okay, so I was a kid from a real small town in West Virginia, right in the center of the state. The town had 2 stoplights and really didn't need either one of them, but they had 2 because the county seat 5 miles up the road only had 1, so they had to just do better. I grew up my entire life there, a lot of outdoor stuff, hunting, fishing, camping, and, played high school football. Didn't really have a vision for what was going to happen after high school. Didn't see myself as academically, smart enough to go on and do college. So when I got out of high school, I graduated and took a construction job. Quickly found out that did not love construction. Didn't get any sleep. I was getting up at like 3:30 in the morning, getting home about 9 o'clock at night for the majority of the year, and then come, about December through January, got laid off and kind of had to figure out the rest of it. So at one point I decided that it really wasn't working out for me. It was kind of, it almost gave me a nervous breakdown. I lost like 20 pounds because I wasn't eating. I was stressed out. A lot of times I would kind of wake up in the morning on the drive in about staring the headlights of a tractor trailer because I was about to run into them. So I didn't adjust too well to working that hard, and didn't really connect with the people in the job. But when I was in high school, I had taken the ASVAB at one point to get out of class. It was a great way to kind of get out of class. I didn't take it too seriously, but I did take it, and all the recruiters kind of after that had started coming by, because I played sports and, scored fairly well on the ASVAB. So they were always trying to get me into the military. I kind of brushed them off. And then the Army recruiter kind of followed up later, but not to get me in the Army, but he was a deer hunter and he wasn't from the area. And so he was trying to find out about some spots to go deer hunting. So I hooked him up with a spot to go hunting. He, didn't really see him again after that. I started working the construction. And then after a while, he'd left a little booklet that had, some guys going airborne, guys in the Ranger Battalion, rappelling out of the helicopters and walking through the swamps. And then there was a section in there with SF guys like in scuba gear coming up out of some swampy water. It was a lot of cool stuff that just kind of appealed to you at that age. And I kept looking back at that book, and finally I decided that, hey, I'm going to reach out to him and contact him, talk to him. And so when I did, he kind of told me that, nah, you don't want to go in the Army. And I was like, well, I'm interested. He goes, no, you got a job. You're doing fine. You really don't need to do it. And I was like, well, I kept after him. And finally he, talked to me about it. I sat down with that little marketing book that he gave me and started asking him about some of the things in there. And the first thing I asked him about was the airborne section. He's like, oh yeah, it's jumping out of airplanes. And I was like, I don't think I could do that. I'm scared of heights. so I don't think it's for me. And he goes, okay. And he was a pretty cool guy. His name was Steve Huggins. I still remember him. And he had been, he's a Vietnam veteran. He was a Ranger. And I'm not sure if he was Ranger qualified or he had been in one of the Ranger companies or if he was just, been to Ranger school. But then I flipped over to the Ranger page and I was like, yeah, this looks really cool. The guys are outside. I'd like to be outside. And, we talked a little bit about it. And he goes, yeah, you got to go to airborne first. And I was like, man, that sounds like it's out for me. So I flipped to the next page, the SF stuff. And I was like, wow, this looks really, up my alley. I'd love to do it. And he goes, up airborne, you got to do it. And I was like, damn, that's not setting me up for success. And I talked to him a little bit about maybe being an MP and, because I thought that might be interesting, get some hand-to-hand combat training. But I kept coming back to the SF stuff. And at the time, they had just come out with the opportunity for guys to come off the street and go directly into Special Forces. They were standing up first group at the time. And, this was about 1983.
Yeah. You guys were the first generation of SF babies after Eagle Claw happened, and they started, really spinning it up.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And it wasn't the 18 X-ray program back then. It was called Unassigned Special Forces. And so I went to the recruiter, went to the MEP station, got the physical, did everything. I had a 119 GT. So they were trying to give me all these administrative jobs and all these things I didn't want. And my brother-in-law had been an infantryman in Vietnam. And he told me, hey, he tried to talk me out of it, tried to talk me into going to the Air Force. And of course, I wouldn't listen to him. And I actually worked with him on the construction job. He's the one that got me the job. He was kind of one of the foremen. And so, I told him, hey, I'm really set. I want to go into Special Forces. And he's like, did everything to talk me out of it. Obviously, I wasn't listening like most kids that age. And so he said, well, there's a Special Forces National Guard group. Why don't you do that? You'll be home, you'll go training, you'll get all, and of course, I didn't listen to that either. So, all that great advice from somebody who knew something, and I said, no, I want to be all in, all out, Special Forces, active duty. I want the whole thing. And, he also told me, well, if you're going to the recruiter, make sure you get exactly what you want and it's in writing because they will lie to you. They will, they're not going to give you what they say. They're used car salesmen. And when I got there, it was exactly like that. They, tried to pawn me off on whatever these positions were that they needed to fill because my GT was high enough for them. But none of those were what I was interested in. So I stood strong and I was like, no, I want to go to Special Forces. And, the guy would, just like the used car salesman, go away and talk to his manager. He'd come back and go, well, I can get you airborne to Italy, great assignment. And then you can volunteer for Special Forces. And I was like, no, it's got to be Special Forces in writing. And then he came back and said, well, I can get you into, the Ranger Battalion. And then you can volunteer from there and go to Special Forces. And I was like, no, I want to go to Special Forces. And so he finally said, yeah, okay, I got a couple options. And, at the time I had learned just enough and I really wanted to be a demo man and blow stuff up. And, I thought that was the way to go for me. And so I asked about that and he came back and he said, well, I can get you into communications. You can be a commo sergeant. And I was like, no, I don't know about that. And the only thing I really knew about it is there was a kid that was a couple years older than high school that left, joined the Army. And he was kind of a skinny little kid when he left. He came back a year or so later and he was huge, And we asked him like, well, man, what happened? How'd you get so big? And he said, well, I went to the Ranger Battalion and I'm a radio guy there and I carry all these radios that are really heavy. And so that stuck in my head. I don't want to be a radio guy. The radios are really heavy. So I turned that down and he came back and he said, well, you could be a medic. And I thought about it. I'd seen a few episodes of MASH, so it looked like they were having a good time. In my mind, Band-Aids were light. I had that stupid young mentality that didn't realize 100 pounds of anything is still 100 pounds, and had no idea that, the medic carries as much or sometimes more than the combo guy. And so I signed up for that and said, okay, put me in as a medic. And then I went to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and left there to go to Fort Sam Houston for the combat medic course. At the time, it was the 91 Bravo course. And, I'd only been on a plane, like, I think I'd flown 3 times, maybe 4. And then they bussed us down to San Antonio, Texas. And I'd been there in the winter in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Got my first case of like mild frostbite there on my nose. And when we were driving into San Antonio in the bus, we drove all night. The sun was coming up over these palm trees, and there was a whole formation of female soldiers running in white T-shirts. And I was like, man, I picked the perfect job. I thought I was definitely where I needed to be. And I went through the medic course. While I was there, towards the end of it, everybody got their orders for their first duty station. And there were a few of us there. I think there were probably 5 or 6 of us that were unassigned special forces and a couple guys that were unassigned Ranger. And a lot of us got these orders that said, and I remember mine said that they were going to send me to Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. It said nothing about airborne school, nothing about any of the other stuff I was promised. And so we went to the cadre and said, hey, our orders aren't correct. I'm supposed to go, to Fort Benning and go to Special Forces. And they're like, and initially they told us, well, you guys didn't get selected. And we're like, well, we didn't even get a tryout. So, and I had said that, okay, if you don't have my orders, then, I need to talk to somebody about, getting out and going back home.
Right.
And so they said, wait a minute. They went back and, rechecked, and they got us another set of orders. So those came in like right before the class graduated, but they were wrong also for 3 of us. Everybody else, they got theirs. They actually, some of them accepted the Hawaii assignment, and then the other set came in and it said Airborne Italy. And so some of the other guys just took the airborne assignment to Italy, and they were told the same thing. Well, you can volunteer once you get done with airborne school. But we never saw those guys again. And then, so we said, hey, listen, we need our orders. They're not correct. So they held us over for an entire cycle at Fort Sam Houston, which wasn't a bad deal. We were frocked as drill corporals and made like additional cadre to supplement the cadre there, which meant we mainly did CQ, charge of quarters duty at the desk a couple nights a week. And then we ran the PT for what they called School for Soldiers. Anytime people messed up during the week, they held them over on Saturday, and we ran PT for them. And so we got to push them pretty hard physically. And in the meantime, because we had completed our medic training, we had the MOS, we worked at the troop medical clinic. So we were working in the TMC on the days we weren't doing CQ, and working as medics. And then myself and one other guy, Joe Culp, who went to first group and was became an SF guy as well. We were working on medevac in the afternoon, so we would get to fly medevac, which was pretty cool. I'd never been on a helicopter before, so we were doing that with them. We didn't really see anything as far as casualties or anything like that, but we got to fly around. We were getting hands-on training in the TMC, and so it was pretty good. And then finally got our orders to go, like toward the end of that cycle, to go to Fort Benning and start airborne school.
Wow. So you get to Benning, you do airborne, and then it's Bragg. And when you get to Bragg, did they do? I mean, SFAS I don't think existed yet, right? Until like
no,
87.
It didn't.
what was it like for you getting into SF and going through that process?
Yeah, so it was interesting because first and foremost, I had no clue about the military whatsoever, because this, going to Fort Bragg was really like going to be my first real duty station. And so, I got my orders. I went to Fayetteville, and on my orders, it had it set up to where I could take 30 days leave. Well, I read that as I had to take 30 days leave. So, I was over there, and at the time I had cousins and uncles that lived in Fayetteville because they had been in the military. And so, I spent some time with them, and I was looking at my orders after I'd been there a couple weeks because I was bored. And, I said, well, I was talking to one of my cousins, and he said, well, you can always just go by and check it out. So I went by to check things out to see, well, hey, what do I got to do? And they're like, okay, you signing in? And I was like, what do you mean signing in? And they've explained it to me like, well, you can sign in now, or you can go ahead and take the rest of your leave, but you got to be here by this day. And I was like, well, I'll sign in now. So I signed in, and at the time they were running pre-phase is what they called it. And it was in the old COSCOM area on Fort Bragg in the World War II barracks. And so they put us in there, and you had to wait for your class time to go out to Camp McCall. That was phase one, basic skills. And so you would sign in, and then they would have all of the kind of, selection evaluations. We did the PT test, we did the swim test, we did the ruck. So everything was just kind of checking the block to make sure you met the minimum qualifications. And, we did that, and basically we were doing it like all week, and we did it for a couple weeks in a row. So I took a lot of swim tests and it was always PT test, swim test, 12-mile ruck. So they would do it like back to back to back and weed guys out. And then you would wait for your class, and while you were waiting in pre-phase, they had this informal selection process that the cadre was running. And the way it worked is they divided you up into elements, and you went to these different training events. And it would start you go on a Monday, and you'd either go to basic skills where you went over knot tying, rappelling, a few other things like that. The other section was patrolling. So you go out, you would learn patrolling. They would, educate you on that. And then the other one was you would go over survival skills. Didn't really do anything formal, but you went through the classes, learned some of the things. And then they had a land nav portion where you would practice land nav, but it was on Fort Bragg. And, they would start you off with just a basic, compass course, make sure you understood how to operate things. But they would rotate you through these. You would start on Monday, and then you would go for a week. And then over the weekend, they would usually rotate you out. But they had a kind of an interesting process where they did it sometimes is they would just call you in, and a lot of times in the middle of the night, they would have you grab all your stuff, line up in front of one of the buildings, and you'd come in and sit down in front of a desk, and the guy would pull out a folder, and he'd look at it. I'm pretty sure now he would pull them off a stack. It was probably blank.
Yeah.
And he would pull it out. He would say, hey, McElwee, it doesn't look like you're doing very good. I think you'd be better off to just go ahead and quit. We can get you a nice assignment. You don't necessarily have to leave Fort Bragg. Otherwise, you're probably going to wind up being sent to Korea or someplace like that. And they would basically try to talk you into quitting. And, I would just say, well, no, I'm going to keep trying, Sergeant. I'm good. And so they'd say, okay, go to building 2756 or whatever, take all your stuff and report over there. So you grab your stuff and you go to the building, and then you'd start a new phase. Well, when you got there, you would look around, and your group of guys were split up. They weren't there anymore. You didn't see them. And you're like, oh man, I guess those guys quit. And so you would go through the week, do your stuff. A lot of it, would be out in the field, depending on which section you're working on. And then come Friday morning, you'd be back in getting breakfast at the mess hall. And then you'd see the guys, and you're like, hey, I thought you quit. And they're like, no, we were doing this phase, that phase. And so, we would link back up there. Sometimes the guys did quit, but a lot of times it was, all in your head that they didn't make it or whatever. And it was the classic thing. Every event was always, with the deuce and a half behind you. And the instructors would always say, okay, take your stuff, get on the truck. There's coffee and donuts at the White House, all that. They were always giving you that same spiel, trying to get you to quit.
Today, I want to tell you guys about Qualia stem cell. Maybe all of you, most of you, have experienced what it's like to get older. And as you age, you don't heal quite as fast as you used to. You don't recover as fast as you used to. And it can feel like your body is not putting out as you expect it to. It can feel like the dial has been turned down one notch. You feel like, it's similar to the same feeling as getting sick, right? So you feel that, you're not really where you should be. You're racking up these little injuries that seem to recover very slowly. But there is something you can do about it. As it turns out, the secret to healing, recovery, and resilience isn't just luck, it's stem cells. These are your body's built-in repair crew. But as we age, the system slows down. Fewer cells, weaker signals, and slower recovery. This is why Qualia stem cell was created. Your cells are powerful, and you can make sure that they stay that way with Qualia's innovative new stem cell formula. They are crafted with nature's most powerful healers like sea buckthorn and royal jelly, so you're ready to take on what's next. You only need to take it for 4 days a month, preserving your body's regenerative capacity over time. So I've been taking Qualia for the last 3 months. I'm actually taking it right now. And it's 6 pills for the first 4 days of each month. And then you're starting again the preceding month. And I found it helpful. I had little pains in my right wrist, my left ankle, and some other things in my elbows too. And I feel actually quite a bit better since I started going through this process. And I hope you guys will check it out if you're experiencing something similar. If you've ever felt like your body just doesn't bounce back like it used to, whether it's after a tough workout, getting sick, or just the wear and tear of life, then this is for you. Qualia Stem Cell was designed to support your body's natural repair systems, helping you heal, recover, and keep going strong. And right now you can try it for up to 50% off at qualialife.com/house. And there's a bonus. Use the code HOUSE for an additional 15% off your order. That's Qualia, QUALIA life.com/house. Your body's built to repair itself. Qualia just helps it do that better. A big thanks to Qualia for sponsoring this episode.
And it was all voluntary for you to give up and to quit doing that. And then once they finished that portion, you would wait for your class to come up and you would go to Camp McCall. Well, when they originally, they took my group and we went out to Camp McCall, and I got out there and I was out there maybe a day or so. We had really just in process, and they called out, okay, let's have all the 18 Bravos over here. Let's have all the 18 Charlies over here. And actually, I don't think they had even labeled the MOS yet. They were saying, hey, all the weapons guys here, all the engineers here. And everybody left, and I was kind of standing there by myself. And I asked one of the cadres, like, hey, Sergeant, what about the medics? He's like, medics? You're a medic? And I was like, yes, Sergeant. And he goes, come here. And so he took me up to the head shed. He goes, wait out here. He went inside. I heard a little bit of yelling, this and that. And he goes, go get your stuff. And then, I got my stuff, came back. He goes, get on the truck. And he didn't tell me anything, and they sent me back to Fort Bragg. And so I was like, well, I had no idea what happened. I got back to the staff office where the TACs were on Fort Bragg in the COSCOM area. They looked around, talked, and I guess somewhere on my paperwork, it had said that I was a weapons guy. And I was like, no, I'm a 91 Bravo. I'm a medic. And so they're like, well, you're not supposed to be out there. They've shifted the course. And now everybody's all the medics are going to go to Fort Sam first to make sure they can pass before would they bother to send them to, out to phase 1. And I was like, okay. So I was kind of stuck waiting around. And in that time, they put us on different details. And, we had some good ones. We had one to where, we actually had one of the other medics, a guy named Dan Rogers, had owned a martial arts school in Fayetteville and was a really accomplished martial arts instructor. So they didn't have anything to do with us for 1 week. So they kind of turned us over to him and let him train us a little bit. So we got some training. Another time they would let us go to the hospital and work over there. And we even got set up to where on the weekends we could go to the emergency room at Womack and get signed off and, do different things. So you could get extra training in while you're waiting. And then one of the most interesting things for me is I got stuck on a detail because I was one of the guys that my security clearance had already come through. And so we had a guy come over, older looking guy, long gray hair, big mustache, glasses, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. And, they told us, I think there was like 4 or 5 of us, like, okay, you're going to go with him. And so we went with the guy. We went over to the other side of post, and, he had a little van that he put us in, and he's like, hold on, wait here. He got out, came back, and he handed out clipboards and said, make sure you read and sign these statements. And so we were reading the statements, and they were non-disclosure statements about how we wouldn't talk about anything we saw. We wouldn't speculate about anything. And then he took us out onto the range, and we were doing range cleanup. And it was kind of interesting because, he would tell us, hey, I want you to do this. And like one day he had there was a target training area that was a building. And he said, hey, there's a front end loader there. Any of you guys know how to operate a loader? And the guys looked around. And I said, well, I know a little bit because, I've worked construction. And he goes, okay, jump on it and knock that building down. And I was like, you sure? And he goes, yeah, just do it. He goes, I'll be back. And he would leave us, and we'd go knock I would knock the building down. We'd clean it up. He'd come back around lunchtime with some old sea rats and give us something to eat, give us the next thing to do. But we got to see a few cool things, do some good training. But I found out later that this was Sergeant Major Walt Shoemate. He was like one of the plank holders for SFODA Delta. And we had no idea at the time, but super great guy. He took us over to eat in the Butner Road mess hall that used to be the old Delta dining facility. And, so we worked for him for, I think, about a month and a half, maybe, doing different things, cleaning up stuff. We saw a few, cool training exercises here and there, but really interesting to work with him and kind of be mentored with that free and easy style.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I picture the guy walking up wearing his cowboy boots and his flannel shirt.
That's him. Absolutely. Yeah. And we thought he was just some old retired guy, but, he was still
living
one of
legend.
the main guys running all the training. And it was pretty cool.
And Walt Shoemate, if I recall correctly, he was killed in Somalia in '93.
I don't think he was. I think he, if I remember correctly, I believe he died later. He actually died of cancer.
Did he? Who am I confusing him with then? But we'll come back to that, and I apologize if my facts are off.
In fact, I think he had already, passed before '93.
Let me see, since we're here and we can edit this a little bit if we need to. Let me look it up to make sure, because I would feel bad if I got that wrong.
Okay, and I'm certainly not sure, but I believe he died of cancer.
The person I'm thinking of was it was a mine. It was OGA guys, and they were driving around and ran over a mine.
That would be Deeks.
Oh, okay.
Sergeant Deeks from 5th Group. And that was in Somalia, yeah.
Let's see here. Going down. No, look at this. Shoemate retired in 1982 and continued to serve in Delta as a civilian until his death in 1993. So it was that time frame, but it doesn't say what killed him.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he died of cancer.
Let's see here. Found something else on him. Yes. Okay, I got it here. Yeah, he worked. Okay, yeah. So he worked as retired in 1982. Continued to work as a civilian safety officer on Range 19 until his death in 1993.
Range 19. That's where we worked.
Yeah, 1993. He passed away of cancer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for correcting me. you spent almost 20 years in fifth group once you finished the Q course, which is pretty cool in of itself. But tell us about kind of, actually, we haven't even really gotten into talked about the Q course at all. Is there any funny stories about your time like when you got to the Q course that you want to tell before we get to fifth group?
I think maybe I hope the statute of limitations on most of them has run out, but I'm trying to think if there's any that are obviously I don't have to worry about my political career, so those will be okay. But there, it was kind of a unique experience, as I'm sure the Q course is for everybody. I know being a medic, we were fortunate enough to be out at Fort Sam Houston, and I always hated it for the guys once they moved the medic course to Bragg, because it's not the same. You at Fort Sam Houston, you're out there, you're going to party all night, every night, and then wander in just in time for PT. And we had some of the hardest PT I think I've had in SF was during the medic course. We had a former scuba guy out there named Pat Mahoney that, from 10th group that pushed us pretty hard with the PT.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know Mahoney.
Yeah. He's still around. I see him on Facebook every once in a while, but he was one of the guys that kind of pushed us through there, and the PT was pretty rough. The academic stuff was, and I'm sure it still is, was really tough. But what made it interesting was the guys, and for me, it was the replacement for my college years. So I was, running amok, going out with the guys, and I actually didn't drink until I got in the Army. And then got to San Antonio. That's where I started, embracing my Irish heritage and kind of giving it a run. And so once we got there, I literally almost failed out because I partied too much. But the only thing that kept me in is there are a lot of great guys that were there that, I rode their coattails. And that was kind of my story through all of the Q courses. There were a couple guys from Ranger Battalion that helped me during phase one and kind of, got me through the patrolling and those skills that obviously I had no experience with because I'd been a civilian prior. And then while I was at Fort Sam, we had some guys that, one of them in particular, that was prior fifth group that was reclassifying and as a medic. And, he was one of the guys that helped get me through that academic side of things. But I really wouldn't have made it if it hadn't been for those guys, for whatever reason, kind of taking me under their wing like a mascot, because I was this young kid that had no clue. And, evidently they thought I was entertaining, so they kind of kept me along for the ride until I got through the Q course.
And tell us about getting to fifth group and sort of what year that was and what it was like at that time.
Yeah, so initially, and you and I talked about this just before the podcast, is I didn't want to go to fifth group. In fact, I don't know of anybody at the time back in the day that wanted to go to fifth group. Yes. Fifth group was on Fort Bragg, and at the time, I think about all they ever did was post cleanup detail. And so I actually had taken like 3 years of Spanish in high school. And so, I was this white kid that could speak a little bit of Spanish. I made some connections like toward the end of the Q course and went over, had one of the guys take me over to one of the battalion sergeant majors of 7th group, because at the time 7th group was involved in Central America. They had all the cool stuff going on. They were the place to be. And so I went over there, talked to him, gave him my whole spiel in Spanish. He was like, "Oh, this is great. We actually got a white guy that speaks Spanish. We'd love to have you over here. Let me get your social security number." Got all my information. Said, "Yeah, we're going to try to get you some orders, get you to 7th group." And then, I'm standing out there when we all got our orders, and 90% of us went to 5th group. That's just how it was. And 5th group was, I think, the last choice on my list at the time. But it actually turned out to be like probably the best experience ever for me. I went over to the other side of post. They were over there off of Butner Road in the old World War II barracks still. And initially I got assigned to 1st Battalion, 5th Special Forces Group. I signed in, and the really cool thing about it is when I showed up, like all of these guys that were sergeant majors and a lot of them that were team sergeants were these senior guys that had been to Vietnam. Some of the rest of them had been and done tours in Iran. And there even used to be stories about how some of them had second wives and families, in Iran. I don't know if it's true, hard to say. But, we had all these guys that had all this real world experience. And the interesting thing about it at the time is you really couldn't tell because you'd be out there mowing the grass with them and you'd see the sergeant major with the lawnmower, the weed eater. And I remember a couple times going over and saying, "Hey, sergeant major, let me do that." And he was like, "No, get out of here. That's the privilege of being the sergeant major is you get the weed eater." And, so it was interesting because we had all these guys that were real heroes that you really just couldn't tell because they were very normal guys. They were pulling their weight just like everybody else. But when you weren't doing post cleanup and you were actually doing training or anything, you got that benefit of all that wisdom.
Yeah.
And, I didn't even realize how much of that was there until I went to PLDC. When I graduated the Q course, I was just a Spec 4. So I was a Spec 4 with a Special Forces tab. I think I was like one of maybe 10 in the whole Army like that. So I went to PLDC so I could get promoted. And when I got there, they were talking about all these things and procedures and stuff in the Army. And it was kind of a group discussion format. And they would ask questions about, military things. And I knew the answers. And a lot of the guys were like, "Well, how do you know that?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I hear about that all the time." And all I had, I didn't know how to actually implement a lot of it. I hadn't done it, but I'd heard these guys talk about it. I had heard their experience, and everything that I was taught was on a different level. I just didn't really know how to apply it yet. And it kind of got me, clued in that I need to take things a lot more seriously and start really figuring out what it means to be a professional. And so that kind of worked out for me. And at one point, I used to carry a list in my pocket, like when I first got there. And my list was why I'm not going to re-enlist. It was all the reasons about, how I'm, doing all this post cleanup. And part of it was I had come in expecting to do great things, and I didn't realize that I hadn't put in my time. I hadn't paid my debt. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no business getting to do the super cool stuff yet. And, but, I wanted it like every other young kid that showed up. And I finally, I had my list, and the sergeant major, it was getting close to time to re-enlist. And the sergeant major, would pull you in and he would have the re-enlistment talk with you. And I told him, "No, I'm not re-enlisting. I'm not doing this." And, he asked me one time, he's like, "Well, why not?" And I pulled out my list. And so
I'm sure he loved that.
Yeah, he loved it. All right. But maybe not the best move for a young troop. But what he did was, he was kind of smart is he said, "Okay, fine." And he sent me out to El Paso, Texas. We had a project out there called the B500 team. And this B500 team was responsible for developing desert tactics, desert equipment, and just kind of putting together the whole concept of how to operate and be more effective in the desert. And they were also out there as cadre to rotate teams through to do desert training. And, they did training on desert survival, signaling. At the time, we were also working with how to use the autolights and how to navigate with vehicles like overland with using these sextant style pieces of equipment that they used to use for sailing because the desert's so, wide open and using these books of star charts and everything. Well, I got out there as a medic, and, when I got out there, one of the things I saw is they had these vehicles, we had these FSVs at the time, the fast attack vehicles, FAVs, and they were these, dune buggies with Porsche engines that would just fly across the desert. And, but they broke down all the time. So spent a lot of time working on these dune buggies. And then they also had motorcycles. Well, I remember specifically we were out doing some training, and one of the guys wrecked and ran one of the motorcycles into a cactus patch. And I mean, just got it like all over him. And as the medic, I wound up picking the stuff out of him, mostly out of his posterior area. And while I was doing it, of course, I was giving him a hard time. I was still kind of a young smart aleck because I had made it through as an E4 with a tab, and now I had my E5, and so I was doing that. And at the time, I aggravated him enough, and he said, "Well, I guess you think you could do better." And I said, "Well, actually, I'm pretty sure I can." And what he didn't know is that when I was in high school, I raced motocross. So I had some experience with the bikes. And so they let me get on the bikes and run around. And as it turned out, I could do it pretty well. And for the first time since I'd been in the Army, I had a great time. I started enjoying what I was doing. And the guys out there were really serious about training. Training was, we would go out on, usually on Monday morning, stay out all week. We would train a lot of night training. We were jumping all the time on Biggs Field. We were very active with a lot of stuff. And then we would have the teams come through on rotation for, survival training. And then we would monitor them while they moved through, these E&E lanes that were set up for them and did practice desert survival. So it finally was starting to look like SF that I had envisioned. And it got me just fired up enough that when I left there and I went back to Fort Bragg, they were asking my Sergeant Major, and he's kind of infamous, Sergeant Major Sims. I don't know how many people know him, but big, tall, black guy with a high-pitched voice that had been in Vietnam and, was famous for the way he talked. And, he had the formation out there one day, and he goes, I need some guys to go to language school, to Farsis and Hairdo. And, and I didn't know what that was. I had no idea what Farsi was. But, I volunteered because it was a year-long command language program at Fort Bragg. And my idea was I would take it, I would re-enlist, at the time they had a $20,000 bonus for medics to re-enlist. And then I would go to night school, get some college, get some education, start getting a little bit more serious about things. And then at that time during language school, I got married to my first wife as a true SF guy. And then, so while I was in language school, I was taking night classes and had an English class at night. And I wound up being the distinguished honor graduate from the Persian Farsi class.
Wow.
And which worked out real well later because, it got me set up to be an interpreter for a classified mission overseas with 5th Group. But once I got through language school, and that stabilized me long enough for them to go ahead and move 1st Battalion and, start moving 2nd Battalion up to Fort Campbell. And so once I got out of language school, then they moved up to Fort Campbell, and I went up there, which I was really excited about. I didn't like Fayetteville, didn't like Fort Bragg. I was really happy to be going up to Fort Campbell in Tennessee. And so that kind of, started things off for me. I got a little different feel for what it might be like to actually be in Special Forces.
This time of year, the pace doesn't slow down, but you still need to. The calendar's packed, the weather's changing, and your body's reminding you that it's time to rest and reset. That's where GhostBed can help. It's a family-run company founded by a team with over 20 years of mattress-making expertise. They've spent decades perfecting how to build a bed that's durable, comfortable, and engineered to help you recover. Every GhostBed mattress is made with premium materials, proven cooling technology, and their exclusive ProCore layer, a targeted support system that reinforces the center of the mattress where your body is the heaviest. It helps to keep your spine aligned and your back supported so you wake up ready to take on what's next. And GhostBed's cooling materials don't just keep you from overheating, they help regulate your temperature year-round. Each mattress comes with a 101-night sleep trial and a 20 to 25-year warranty, plus fast, free shipping. Most orders arrive in 2 to 5 days, so better rest is just around the corner. Right now, during GhostBed's holiday sale, you can get 25% off site-wide for a limited time. Just go to ghostbed.com/house and use the promo code HOUSE at checkout. That's ghostbed.com/house, promo code HOUSE. Upgrade your sleep with GhostBed, the makers of the coolest beds in the world. Some exclusions apply. See site for details. And thank you, GhostBed, for sponsoring the show. Please check out the link down in the description and support our sponsor. So you get the Fort Campbell around 1989. I think, and we were still in them when I was there, those like World War II era buildings on the main post area.
Yeah, they had the World War II barracks that were right beside our area, but then they had some newer ones that we had accepted. And the big controversy when we got there was an area off on one side of post that was the Cav Scout area. And everybody was really upset that we didn't take that area. It was kind of off by itself. It was, out where Range Road started. It was a really nice setup, but for some reason they didn't take it. We took these barracks that were like kind of right in the center of the post, same place they still are now. And the barracks weren't like old World War II, but they definitely weren't new. They were the 3-story brick buildings there in the area. And so we got there, and I wasn't there very long before we got this deployment to go on a classified mission to do a 6-month rotation in Peshawar, Pakistan. It was a mission under the UN called Operation Salam, where we were teaching demining. And we were working with the Afghan Mujahideen. And, so it worked out well for me because I wound up being an interpreter to work with the guys there. And then also while I was there, I took some night classes through the embassy to learn the Dari dialect. And so I kind of improved my my Persian to where I was dialed in pretty good to working with the Afghans.
So, I mean, but the time frame you're there, the Soviets are still in Afghanistan, right?
Yeah. Yes, yeah, they were. And a lot of the things that were going on were kind of directed towards supporting the Afghan Mujahideen against the Soviets and trying to continue to push them out.
Mm-hmm. Were you guys part of helping to train and field them with the weapons that we were delivering to Pakistan?
So that operation wasn't directly with that, but there were some other things going on that were coordinated through other government agencies that were focused primarily on that. And we definitely had some interesting encounters while we were there. I know one of the things that happened while we were in Pakistan is, we would go out to train, and we had about an hour drive out to the training area where we were working with these Mujahideen, and it was, further north. And so, we would have this long bus ride every day in the morning and then also back in the evening or afternoon. And then one day, we would tend to fall asleep on the way back. And to be honest, it's because we had connection to the American club, and we were able to go in there. And for me, I was still young, and I was going out drinking every night and living it up. But I was on the van. We had a big 12 passenger van, 16 passenger van that was driven by a local. And so I was sitting there, asleep, and all of a sudden I heard this slam into the side of the vehicle. And I woke up, and we were surrounded by a crowd of people that were having a protest and a riot. And we were basically trapped because of the traffic. And, at the time we weren't issued or allowed to have any actual weapons, but because of the way things were working, we were going to this town called Dara, which is like the weapons bazaar along the border. And they had all the weapons that they had recovered from the battles with the Soviets, a lot of the things that were being sold to them by, aspects of our government. And we would go there and negotiate. And because I was one of the interpreters, I would help negotiate to purchase these mines. And they were live mines. And then we would bring them back and make them inert to use as training aids. Well, when we would go there, because we didn't have any weapons, one of the things we did was some of the guys purchased, their own black market weapons that we definitely weren't supposed to have. Some of us had Russian hand grenades. Some of us had, a couple guys had pistols, but, hand grenades were only like $2 a piece. So, the guys were stocking up to have something, because the town itself was definitely the wild, wild west in Peshawar. And I remember I had, a big knife in my backpack and a couple other things. And so I woke up with this riot going on, and the rocks were bouncing off our van, and everybody was scrambling. And so I took my backpack, placed it up against the window so the glass wouldn't shatter and get on me, and started opening it up and pulling out my knife and getting ready for whatever was going to happen. And then, we looked around a little bit, and we found out that they weren't actually attacking us. They were across the road, and they were throwing rocks, and they were trying to reach across the road and hit the local law enforcement, which was out there in riot gear. Well, we didn't see them initially. We just saw the people throwing rocks. So we thought it was directed at us, that they'd figured out, a van full of white guys down there, and they were going to overrun us. And, truthfully, it's probably one of the more terrifying experiences I had in the military. But it worked out, and the riot police actually moved across in front of us, hit them with some tear gas and, some shields, and gave them some wooden shampoo and kind of settled things down. And then we eventually got past the traffic jam and moved on out. But, that was just one of the many things that happened while we were on that deployment. And during one incident while we were there, we were about, and it would happen on a Friday when we kind of had a day off because that was the holy day. But myself and I think one of the other guys, we were actually in like a local car that belonged to one of the guys that worked for the consulate, the American club. And, we never found out, but we're pretty sure he was one of the other government agency individuals. And, because we got to know him over time. And, of course, he never said anything. But because he also spoke Farsi, I talked to him a little bit. And I found out eventually through some other people that were there that he had been present whenever the Iranian embassy was taken over. And, was in the American embassy when the Iranians took over the American embassy in Iran. And so, he was this kind of crazy character that, that was bigger than life. And you would have swore he was, just flaming crazy. And, but as it turned out, if you talk to him very long, you kind of realize that he was a pretty smart guy and he had some connections and some things going on. But we would often go down and steal his personal car because I spoke Persian and his driver did. So we would go down and tell the driver all the time that, hey, Mr. Mike says you take us home. And it was a running joke for a while. But we were riding along in his car, headed back to the house one afternoon. And about a block in front of us, a car bomb went off and cratered the road. And it had been targeted against somebody there. I think one of the generals or one of the tribal leaders, I don't remember who, but it killed them and it, wiped out a big section of town. Our guy turned around, headed us back towards the consulate. We were kind of just barely lucky to get out of it because it was a mess. But it was, one of the more elaborate experiences during that time. And then we also had one of the guys on the team that was in my team house. And we were staying in these civilian houses out on one side of the town in an area called Hayatabad. And it was a fairly well-to-do civilian area with these big 3-story houses. We had a cook and a houseboy, and then we had these guards that were local guards that always fell asleep every night when they were supposed to be guarding us. But we were in the house, and I remember it was coming up on Halloween. And the American club was going to have a Halloween party. They threw some righteous parties. They were always, having these theme parties all the time because there's nothing else to do over there. And we were lucky enough to have access to the American club. And since we were going to this Halloween party, we had picked up some supplies and we were making some costumes. And I had actually had my medic bag opened up on my bed in the room and had some gauze laid out and stuff because we were making some costumes out of plaster casting because we could get that on the local economy and it was easy to mold and make costumes with. And then all of a sudden I heard a big slam that sounded like somebody dropped a stack of lumber on a tile floor. And then it was followed by screaming. So I stepped out into the hallway and, the guy came out of the room down the hall with his hand, what was left of it, and it was squirting blood about 10 feet, hit me in the chest. And, so I stepped back in my room, I grabbed the gauze and put it on his hand and kind of wrapped it up. But what had happened is he he had been on the first rotation of this and then came back and did a second rotation on this Operation Salam operation. So this was to be his second 6-month rotation. And he was an engineer, and he had gotten used to defusing these mines, and had gotten overly curious about one of the fuses for a landmine, or excuse me, a tank mine, anti-tank mine. And in the process, he had taken a Leatherman and scratched a piece of the igniter, and it exploded and tore his hand off.
Oh man!
And at the same time, it ripped a piece of the Leatherman off, the hole punch piece, which he was using to kind of dig into it, and it went through the neck of his roommate. And luckily, his roommate, wasn't seriously injured. We didn't know that at the time because there was blood and a lot of stuff everywhere. But the guy that lost his hand, Jeff Horton, we treated him, packaged him up, and then I handed him off to the other medic who transported him to the hospital. And I started checking out the guy who had the neck injury, which turned out to be, perfectly benign. Luckily for him, it was about an inch off to the outside and missed his carotid and his jugular vein. But, so that was kind of another exciting moment in the Operation Salam tour.
This is also kind of like, for you, I guess, your real first taste of like the SF mission.
Yeah. I had gone on one other short mission to the Gulf in Bahrain as a medic and a Persian speaker. I'd gotten attached to a group of SEALs. They were doing this mission at the time called Prime Chance, where they were seizing Iranian boats that were cruising through the Strait of Hormuz. I didn't really do much there, but it was cool to go along and be there for a few weeks, hang out with the SEALs and ride the helicopters. But for the most part, it was not as SF a mission as this one in Peshawar, Pakistan. It was full on UW,
right,
with an interesting twist. Yeah.
And what was sort of your perception of how that UW campaign was going on at that time? Did you have some inkling that the Soviets were on the brink of defeat, or was it still very uncertain?
I think it was not quite 50-50 at that point. I think everybody was fairly sure that they were on a downward spiral. I don't think anybody knew exactly, to what degree, but I think everybody was fairly certain that the efforts that were being directed against the Soviets were having a pretty intense effect, and that it was going to take its toll eventually. It was some unique insight into Afghanistan in the future. I realized when we were on that trip that we were going to have problems with Afghanistan and Pakistan down the road repeatedly on a serious level. We had a guy at one point who was probably our best student as one of the demining individuals. And then we had some other people in the same class come to us and say, hey, this guy's, he's not Mujahideen, he's a communist sympathizer. And we're like, whoa, so wait a second. And this guy was always getting with us. We would have, extra training with him, like on all the breaks. He had all these questions about tactics and stuff. And then we had no reason to not talk to him and answer his questions and kind of give him some information. But he was a serious student. But these guys came to us and with this, rumor that he was communist supportive and he was one of the bad guys. And then, it went back and forth, and they finally decided that, hey, we can't prove that he's a bad guy. And there was a lot of consideration that it was just a political or tribal dispute because they were from one tribe, he was from another tribe. And that, and what we saw was, it was the guys from the Pashtun, clique that was in the camp that came against him. And he was a Farsi speaker, which is one of the reasons I had interaction with him. But so they wound up kind of booting him out of the camp. They wouldn't let him continue because there was controversy around him. And the real interesting thing about it was years later, after 9/11, during some other operations, I was reviewing and looking at some footage, and I saw this guy plain as day as one of the Taliban soldiers that had been captured.
Holy
so I don't
shit.
know if that whole incident built up into kind of turning him to make, because he seemed pretty pro-American when we were working with him. But obviously, when you're dealing with indigenous people and forces, there's a huge level of deception, especially when you're working with Middle Easterners. And as Americans, people don't really understand that their whole purpose in life, based on the religion and the Quran, is to deceive to the utmost ability in order to kill the enemy. And so, it's one of those interesting things. Like, was he, one of the guys that was kind of against us, just using us for our information, or did some of that build up into kind of influencing him to become one of the Taliban later?
And when you got home from this, you got put on a special projects team, right?
Yeah. So when I got back, I actually interviewed, and the one thing I know, all the groups have their own special projects sections, but when I was in fifth group, they had three main special projects teams, and that was before the move up to Campbell. They had one that was known as Grizzly Hitch that did a particular mission. Then there was another one that was a combined team that was in 2nd Battalion. And then there was an additional one that was also assigned to 2nd Battalion. And those three ODAs that were special projects moved up to Fort Campbell, and then the Grizzly Hitch guys stayed behind to form 3rd Group. And so when I got back from Pakistan, that team approached me and asked me, hey, would I be interested? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. They were especially interested in my Persian Farsi skills. They needed a medic. And then also, I had just had that rotation and working with the Afghans. And so it kind of aligned with some interests that they had. So they interviewed me, and I got selected, and then I was part of that special project team for a while.
What, as far as what you're able to say, I mean, what was a special projects ODA back in those days?
So back in those days, it was an ODA that was, it belonged on paper to 5th Group, but it answered for tactical control and operational control to another organization. And it, depending on which special project it was, it can vary on exactly who they came under. Some of them, I think, came under SOCOM. It just depends on how they were aligned.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what did you guys end up doing? You said you were oriented towards the AFPAC region again.
So the mission was to kind of supplement and work with some other government agencies to support that overall mission.
Was this part of like the Stinger missiles and training up those guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. As a matter of fact, one of the things I did once I got to that team is I went and became Stinger missile qualified.
We had Baz Basil on the show talking about that a ways back. Did you know him?
I think I know who he is. I don't personally know him.
He would have been a SAD guy, ground branch guy at the time.
Right.
Him and another guy, I believe, they were like, they set up a lot of the Stinger missile training in Pakistan.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it was an interesting thing. And then I really wasn't on there too long before the Gulf War kicked off.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, it was kind of interesting because all of those three teams were assigned to 2nd Battalion of 5th Group. And then, 1st Battalion moved up there first, 2nd Battalion came, and then they had to form 3rd Battalion with all the, all kinds of leftover guys, a lot of brand new guys. And so all of that was really just kind of standing up when I got back from the Pakistan mission. And 2nd Battalion had three ODAs that were actually assigned to them on paper, but were operating as special projects. And so during that time, the one special project that I went to work for had worked with the command, and they decided to move on paper over to 3rd Battalion so that they would have this other operational detachment. And then the Gulf War kicked off, and we were, there was a big discussion, and everybody took a vote on, hey, do we want to continue working on the project, or do we want to go and deploy for the war? At the time, it was pretty certain right off the bat that there was going to be a war. There was The buildup was happening, and everybody on the team voted to go to war. That was the unanimous thing. The project was cool. A lot of cool stuff was happening, and guys were doing things. But this wasn't a straight up all out war. Everybody wanted to do it, and so we deployed with 3rd Battalion. As just one of the regular ODAs. But right before we deployed, they split up our team a little bit because we had all these senior guys that had a lot of experience. And so they split up some guys. I was the newest guy, assigned to the team. So I was one of the first guys to get plucked and sent to this brand new ODA where I didn't know anybody. And the majority of the guys were brand new. They had maybe less than 6 months team time, for the most part. And then they had a few guys that had, come from different areas, and you know how it is. Anytime you form a new group, they don't always send their best people. So, nobody wants to give up their greatest guys. So a couple of the guys, especially like the team sergeant I had at the time, was not impressive. And I had come from having some really great team sergeants, so it stood out pretty heavily. And so here I was, going to war with this kind of new team, and not very impressive team sergeant. It wasn't a good feeling.
But you guys got deployed for 9 months for the Gulf War, right?
Yeah, I was over there for 9 months. I actually stayed. The team was there, I think, for 8. I stayed an extra month because they needed a volunteer to stay and do some stuff. And at the time, I had nothing better to do, so I stayed.
And you guys were working with the Saudis, and I recall there's a name for this. I can't remember it, but it was the 5th Group augmentation teams with the different Arab armies in the coalition. Do you recall?
Yeah, they were called CAS teams, Close Air Support Teams.
Yeah, thank you. So can you tell us about that?
We were attached to the Saudis, and we were at the tri-border area in an area called Hafar al-Batin, which was this big dry wadi bed that was considered to be a potential high avenue for a counter invasion or for an attack from the Iraqis with tanks.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so what were you doing out there for that 8-9 months?
So initially we were training the Saudis, which were less than highly motivated. They were not your dynamic soldiers at all, but we were trying to convince them and build rapport with them. It was a classic SF UW mission in that regard, because we had to kind of win them over, train them to try to get them up to a standard where things would be okay. But at the time, we also received a couple of cross-border reconnaissance missions and a couple other taskings to do some things along the border, a couple of things to serve as kind of a quick reaction and reinforcement force, especially during a couple of the small battles that happened. So we were kind of just jacks of all trade for the most part. They're really trying to figure out what to do with this, I think, for the most part. But generally, we were just kind of keeping the Saudis company, kind of trying to keep them comfortable and keep them involved in the war, so they didn't give up. And interesting enough, though, is we were up there with them, and then we packed up a couple times to go out and pull reconnaissance at night on this Wadi al-Batin to make sure there wasn't an invasion or a counter invasion. And right before we received another order to do it, it was probably about the 4th time we had done this, to load up and go observe. And it was just us, the team. And it was actually the night that the air war took off. And while we were loading our vehicle, kind of middle of the night, we're listening to the BBC we had these little Toyota truck technical vehicles that we had welded, stands in the back for 50 cals and Mark 19s, mainly 50 cals. And these were our vehicles. We didn't really have the Humvees or GMVs then. And so we were loading up this makeshift technical truck to head out, and listening to the BBC on the radio. And then all of a sudden we heard the announcement on the radio, and there was like a news break, and then we had the planes fly like right over us, low, real fast, like whoosh, 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 whoosh. And right after that, the lady on the radio said, and the invasion of Kuwait has begun. We're like, holy crap. And then the whole sky lit up across the horizon. So we threw our stuff on there, headed up there to get ready to see what kind of counterattack was going to happen. And, we were only back a little bit at our company headquarters. And so we started heading up that way. We couldn't get on the road because all of the Saudis had jumped in their tracked vehicles and were headed back towards us, running from the border. And so we had to get off the road, drive across, get in position. And they had the highway blocked up, all the lights on. Some of them had these tents, that attached to their tracked vehicles. And they just like jumped in the vehicle and drove off and drug the tents off the back of them. And so we stayed up there all night waiting for a counterattack from the Iraqis, but nothing ever happened. And then the next day we, started heading back, and we went across the lines to kind of survey where the Saudi troops had been that we were working with. They were all gone. They had all fled back behind our company. We saw all their equipment left, around through there. There was like one of them left like a whole supply, whatever their supply company was. So there was all this equipment there. We were up there, Kmarting through it, picking out some new gear. And eventually we saw one of their officers who had been sent up there to survey the area to find out, kind of what was happening. And we saw him, we're like, hey, what's going on? And we're like, hey, the war started. And all he could do was shake his head. He was miserable. He's like, oh, no good, no good. And we're like, no, this is good. We're going to be done. We're going to be out of here soon. He was distraught. He was about to have a nervous breakdown. But those guys all fled to the rear and left us up there, 9 guys to defend the whole border.
Were you ever able to rally those guys and get them back up on position?
They came back like right after that, the next day. They, we were able to convince them to come back up and, set everything back up again. I think just because they weren't clued into the air attack, and I think initially when it happened, they weren't sure they were our planes. Mm-hmm. We had a lot of issues with them the whole time we're along the border, especially once the air war started, like right after that, because, they had anti-aircraft tracks that they were using, and sometimes they would lock onto the A-10s with them. And, we were telling them, hey, don't do that because we own the air. Those are our guys. Don't point your guns at the A-10s and lock onto them. And at one point we had one of their tracks that locked onto one of the A-10s and that was flying along the border. The A-10 turned and lit him up and just like shredded that track. The Saudi that was on the gun got like ripped in half. There was nothing we could do to save him. He was tore up and it was all because they had turned their gun and locked onto him after being repeatedly told several times that, hey, don't do that. But, they just didn't have a really good basic understanding of how it was all going to work. They were not motivated to be there. Their whole concept was, hey, you guys will fight the war for us.
Right.
We're just up here getting paid. So it was kind of sad, really, to try to get them motivated to join in on all the things that needed to happen.
So you guys were not able to be one of the prongs going into Iraq with the Saudi National Guard.
Actually, we were.
Really,
which was probably the worst part. Is this same group of folks? I mean, we nurtured them for months and finally got them to where they were feeling a little more motivated. And then whenever we launched the ground invasion, we headed out with these guys and went to breach the minefield. The interesting part about it is, and I got a great picture of this somewhere, is when it came time to breach the minefield, it was it was in the early evening and it was prayer time. They actually stopped right before the minefield and got out their rugs and started praying. And then we got some mortar fire, luckily not too close, while these guys were praying, but they were going to continue praying. We had to get out and actually round them up and say, hey, listen, you can pray later. We need to keep moving through the minefield. And so once we moved through the minefield, we had an objective to attack a former Kuwaiti base. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it had been overtaken by the Iraqis and now it was held by Iraqi soldiers and it was on the way to Kuwait City. So we arrived there with the Saudis just before dark, and being the motivated guys that they all stopped and said, "Hey, it's dark. We're not going to go in." Well, we had a battalion commander at the time and a couple of his staff guys that decided they were going to, inspire the Saudis and show them how it's done. And so they went into the compound, the complex, and got pinned down. And then my team received the request to go in and help them out. So by this time, we had traded our technical vehicles in, and we had M113 anti-personnel carriers. So we had armored vehicles, and we had 3 guys to a vehicle. We had like all the armament and tons of stuff. I mean, I remember I think we had 3 Stinger missiles per vehicle. We had probably 8 AT-4s, a couple boxes of grenades, all the ammo we could carry. And that was for each vehicle. 2 of them had 50 cals. 1 of them had a Mark 19 on it. So we were gunned up pretty good. But, there was still only 9 of us to go in there and, try to free them out of being pinned down inside the city. So we rammed the gate with the 113, went in, got to the area and got into a firefight with some folks that then ran into a mosque. And at the time, I was on the 50 cal. Because I was one of the few guys that knew how to operate the 50 cal. And each vehicle had a commo guy or somebody operating the radio that could call CAS, and then somebody that was driving it. And so, I had a commo guy in my vehicle. I was the gunner as the medic at the time. And then our 18 Bravo at the time had been in Ranger Battalion, and he was driving the M113. So that was kind of the setup for all 3 vehicles. And so we moved in and shot up this one building and kind of ripped through the walls with the 50 cal. After a good exchange with them, we had a big number of guys surrender to us. They came out waving a bed sheet in a line, and more guys than 9 guys could handle. There were hundreds of them, and so we got that figured out and turned them over to somebody else, and then from there we received orders to move on in towards Kuwait City, stopped on the outskirts of Kuwait City for the night, and then rallied into the invasion and the operations in the city after that.
Wow. What was it like going into the city?
Oh, it was madness, because the road had been just annihilated with all the tanks, all the vehicles that were trying to flee the city. The A-10s and the other aircraft had just wiped them out, and they were clogged up and just, just devastated. And we saw several of them along the way that we ran into tanks, and some of their tanks had been like buried into position. I'm not sure why they did that, but they decided to dig these trenches, put the tank in it, and then, they were stuck inside these little positions. And so we, as we drove through, we called the A-10s on them, and a couple of fast movers, and then lit them up with the guns as we went by them. And just devastated them. So there was just like carnage with all the tanks and a lot of the bodies and everything as we moved through, especially into the city.
Yeah, I think with the burying of the equipment, I think that might have been some sort of miscommunication or something with Army psyops. That it was supposed to be like lay down your arms, but the way it translated was like bury your arms. It was something similar to that.
Yeah, I collected some of the little leaflets that they dropped, as we went through, and I've got them in an album at home because there's some interesting keepsakes on, and we remember like watching them every evening. For a while during the war, they would send the B-52s and they would bomb them every night at the same time and just like light up the sky. To be honest, at one point for a while, we were feeling sorry for them because you could see it coming, for minutes as they were streaming across just as the sun was going down. And you knew about the time the sun went down, they were going to get their daily bombing. And man, they just hammered them day after day after day. And we were having them, while we were along the border, we were having them surrender, fairly regularly in pretty big groups. And a lot of times when they surrendered, they would come up and try to hug us. And, they didn't understand, hey, we're at war. So we were having to throw them to the ground and search them. And, but they felt like they were at a family reunion or something. I don't know what was going on. They were so excited to be out of there, but at the same time, they hadn't received the memo that, look, we're still focused on you as the enemy.
Yeah, I mean, unless it's like the Republican Guard, they're not really interested in dying for Saddam, I don't think.
Yeah, they really weren't, and it was kind of it was a pretty sad story for most of them because they were kind of stuck in the middle.
Right.
They were basically told, if you run away, we'll shoot you, and then if you run too fast towards us, we might shoot them because
Right.
It's hard to tell. It wasn't a real good win-win situation for them.
And for your element, did you guys have like a phase line that you were supposed to move up to in Kuwait City?
We did. I want to say, I don't remember for sure, but I think it was like 6 Ring Road was our one limit of advance we were supposed to reach by the end of the morning of that first day.
Mm-hmm.
Or I guess it'd be the morning of the next day. But because our first objective was to retake that military complex. And then after that, we got the follow-on mission to move on into Kuwait City. And I think it was to stop at 6 Ring Road, but I don't remember for sure. It's been a long time.
So you guys didn't see the highway of death and all that kind of stuff?
We saw some of it because once we moved up into position, some of us were pulled out to do different things. And then they started retasking us to work on missions. Some of the guys got moved over to the equestrian club. There were several other follow-on missions that we were kind of tasked to do to start to regroup. Once the city was retaken or the country was retaken, they just kind of held the coalition forces in place. They didn't really play much of a part then, so they started retasking a lot of the SF teams, and that's what happened to us. I think it was middle of the second day we started getting retasked, and we were moving over to regroup, and so we did see some of that in the process by moving towards rally points in order to get tasked out for the next thing.
And what was the next thing for you? Like you mentioned, you had volunteered to stay an additional month.
So I'm trying to remember exactly what we did after that. I mean, nothing exciting happened after that. It was a lot of routine, boring,
security,
moving stuff to the rear. Yeah, it was really mundane at that point. There was not much happening. We had a few folks that were working with guys that had been part of the Kuwaiti resistance element, and part of it was trying to bring them back in and get them to stop beating and brutalizing the Iraqis that were captured, because they were on the verge of some war crimes. So there was a lot of guys trying to negotiate some of that and get that under control. Trying to get equipment back to the rear, and I think I pulled a little duty, running a battalion aid station or company aid station for a while to just kind of take care of guys as we're trying to rotate and start to pull guys out.
Cool. And so, I mean, this is your big war experience after training for it for years and years. And what was it like coming back home from Desert Storm?
It was really interesting because, we had the benefit of getting all the praise that the Vietnam guys should have gotten.
Yeah.
And everybody, was finally aware of how the country had acted. And so there was a lot of guilt, I think. And as a result, people maybe overcompensated or tried to some degree. So there was a lot of, some of the guys were coming back. They had parties and parades, and they were going to New York City. I didn't do any of that. I just came back. There was a big, welcome thing at the airfield at Fort Campbell when we got back. And then I got back, turned in my weapon, and went on 30 days leave. That was the thing at the time is to take some leave. And it was, like I said, I'd moved over there to a brand new team. Didn't know a lot of the guys. Most of them were brand new. The initial leadership was not very impressive. We actually, during that time, got rid of the team sergeant that wasn't that great, and we got a guy that was actually, a much more dynamic leader who was only an E7, that was the 18 Fox, but moved up and took the team and really ran it the way it was supposed to be. So, I was a little disenchanted after my experience there, because I'd been spoiled. I'd had some good experiences being in 5th Group. I had my first couple of team sergeants were like really great, very organized, very professional, and the one team sergeant I had when I was on the special projects team was a guy named Greg Daly that I think he actually designed the Halo badge, and he had been part of the blue light teams and stuff like that. So really great, impressive guy. Learned a lot from him. So I'd had all this great leadership, and then I got stuck with this guy
that's so cool,
I shouldn't
Randy.
even been at SF.
I wrote about Greg Daly in my book, in Blue
Yeah?
Light. Yeah, about his involvement in Blue Light. Now, I recently talked to his son a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, cool, super cool guy.
Very cool. And,
Yeah.
and very laid back, like kind of a cool surfer dude, and just really smart as far as SF, and an inspiring leader to really kind of, teach you a lot. I wish I'd have paid more attention and and really understood. It's the same thing as kind of working with Walt Shoemate. I didn't know what I had.
Right.
But, once you go to the other side of it and you get somebody who's a weak leader after having some strong leaders, then you recognize all those traits and you really start to have a clue about, the benefits you had earlier.
So the next thing for you, you got put on a desert mobility team.
Yeah. I was lucky enough that one of the guys who had been on the Pakistan trip with me had taken the desert mobility team in that company that I was in 3rd Battalion. And so he knew who I was, and he had been there, when the guy blew his hand off, and, we were there the whole time for that 6 months. So he got me moved over to his team. He knew I had done the B500 stuff in the desert, and then I had some background with the motorcycles and the vehicles. And so he, got me on that team and kind of really turned things around for me. A guy named Dave Brace, great team sergeant. And, we had probably one of the best teams I think I've ever been connected to or saw while I was in Special Forces. We had a lot of, great guys, highly motivated, very technical in their individual MOSs, and a team that just really gelled well.
Yeah, and you guys had all this experience doing it from Desert Storm.
Yeah, we did. And most of the guys, we had like one or two guys that were new that had missed Desert Storm, but for the most part, the guys all had solid backgrounds. And then the interesting part is not long after that, we actually got deployed to Pakistan again to do a joint training mission with the Pakistani Special Forces, which was another great trip. And since I'd had that time in Pakistan, that kind of really set me up well for success to do well with that.
With the SSG.
Yes, the SSG, Special Service Group.
Was Chris Miller with you guys?
Chris Miller, I think maybe he was. He wasn't on my team.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember if he was there for sure. I didn't work directly with him, so I don't remember if he was there or not.
Yeah, it might have been like the team before or the team after or something like that.
Could have been. We actually went twice. So I went on 2 of those deployments with the SSG to do joint operations with them.
What was that like working with them?
It was really cool. They have this unique compound that's on the top of this mountain called Cherat, and they were actually initially founded by some of our special forces from I think it was from 10th Group back in the 50s, and so they very much treated us like their founding fathers, big brothers. There was a lot of respect there, a lot of like admiration. When we were going over there, they actually renovated a complete barracks complex for us to stay in, made sure we had sit-down toilets, hot showers. Kind of unique because the hot showers were, run by a wood-burning water heater.
Wow.
And they actually had a little kid that they kept out there, a little teenager that had to feed the logs into the hot water heater. And I think one day one of the guys inadvertently came out of there and the water was a little cold because it hadn't got fired up yet. And he, shook and shivered and said, "Whoo." And one of the Pakistani officers went around and grabbed the kid and started beating him with a riding crop.
Oh,
we were like, hey, it's okay. And he was, tell him, hey, these are our guests. Whatever you do, don't let the water be cold. And from then on, the water would like scald you because he, he had gotten some serious discipline over it. But it was interesting because they have this whole sheer cliff wall that has all these carved symbols in it from all the British units that they had worked with, and then they have a giant, insignia with a sword and lightning bolts. It's their version of our crossed arrows, So it's their shoulder insignia, and it's in this giant, probably 12, 15-foot model of it. And I got a great team picture in front of it of that from that trip. And then we did, some joint mountain training with them on one of those operations where we actually we did a night combat equipment jump. I was the jump master for that in the foothills in the north, and then did a movement across the mountains in the snow. And it actually snowed so much that we had to keep somebody awake and shoveling snow off the tent all night to keep it from collapsing. And then we moved to an area, and we had to do they were insistent for some reason on doing a river crossing. And so, with this glacier water, and, we spent a lot of time trying to talk them into, there's a bridge right over there. We can see it. Let's do that. We'll use security and then hit the objective. But they were hell bent on having that river crossing. For whatever reason, it was one of their things they were going to die on. So we did the river crossing with them, revived some people from cold, and then went to hit the objective and then wrapped up the mission from there. So it was actually another really good SF training opportunity to do that with them.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty hardcore, moving through the snow, jumping in, crossing the river, freezing water. Yeah.
Yeah, this day, I don't like the cold. It gets too cold here in Georgia for me. I'm going to have to move south, I think, because I still haven't thawed out.
No, I stopped running outdoors in like November. I'm like, nah, I'm not in Ranger school anymore. I'm not doing this. So after this, you get promoted to team sergeant.
So before I get promoted, I actually came back from one of these trips.
Oh, that's right.
And I came down on orders for civil affairs, 96 civil affairs at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, because I'd been on a protected status from my time on the special project team, so I couldn't be moved or PCS'd. And so I got these orders because now I was off that team, my time was up, and they were going to send me to 96 civil affairs as a medic. And I really didn't want to go. I was adamant, hey, so I called up SF branch. I was like, hey, what can I do? I really don't want to do this. I'd like to do something else. And the guy at the time, I don't remember his name, but he was like, hell no, there's no way you're getting out of this. You're going to go, and you're just going to have to suck it up, Sergeant McElwee, and do your time, pay your debt to society, and that's the end of that. And I was like, man, that's and in classic SF tradition, the only way to really get an SF guy to do anything is tell him it can't be done. So I started, trying to call in favors and find out, well, what could I do? And at one point, like when I had auditioned for the special project team, I'd also run into some guys, and there was some talk about trying to do Delta support selection as a medic. And at the time, I was on that special project team, so I was like, well, I'm good. I'm loving this. I don't want to do it. I'm not interested. And so I contacted them back and said, hey, I'd like to come try out, do that. And so they asked me, and I was a senior E7. They're like, I'm sorry, man, we're really not interested in you. And, I don't know if it was because I was senior or because I had said no before, but either way, I'd kind of maybe burnt that bridge, at least for the moment. And so they didn't have any interest in me. I tried to go to, to Sapartak or to even, be one of the medical instructors at Fort Bragg. I tried everything I could think of, and I was running out of options. And I came across this assignment to go to the Ranger Battalion. At the time, right after the Gothic Serpent deployment and the incident with Black Hawk Down, they had restructured, or in the process of restructuring, the SF medic course to front load all the trauma medicine. So the Ranger medics, the SEALs, all the other special ops medics could get that training as part of their package. But in the interim, General Downing for SOCOM wanted to have 4 SF medics at every Ranger battalion to do interim training and train up all the Ranger medics. And so they had a spot at 3rd Ranger Battalion. They had a guy that was there that had been working for School of Soldiers, or no, excuse me, School of Americas. And then he came over to 3rd Battalion and he couldn't pass their PT test. And, so he made a really great impression for me. I didn't know about any of this until I showed up. And so I found out about the position. I called about it and I said, hey, I heard about this. I'm interested. Is it something that we could work out? And the guy asked me, he goes, well, can you do pull-ups? And I was like, well, how many? And he goes, can you do 6? I was like, hell, I can do 10. I can handle it. He goes, well, what about ruck march? I was like, oh yeah, I can ruck march. He goes, well, can you run? I was like, well, so. I'm like, how much we talking? He's like, 5 miles in 40 minutes. I was like, yeah, I can do that. And so they set me up to go to ROPE, the Ranger Orientation Program. And basically it was selection for the position. So I went TDY to Fort Benning and went through the ROPE selection and took the position and went down to 3rd Ranger Battalion.
So you went to ROPE, so you actually became a Ranger.
Oh, absolutely became a Ranger. So the whole time we were there, we wore black berets because that was what the uniform was at the time. Had high and tights every Monday, just like all the other Rangers, wore the Ranger scroll. We were 100% assigned and part of the Ranger Battalion. We did every qualification, certification, every task that all the other Rangers had to do. We had to do it, and we had to do it better.
Yeah,
so,
that's awesome. Yeah, it's not just some TDY assignment that you went and go chill out somewhere. Yeah, that's the real thing.
It was not a chill out assignment at all.
What was that like going from like your whole career up until this point had been special forces, long hair, slightly out of regulation, mustaches, all of that, and working in an unconventional environment a lot of times, and now going to the super regimental regiment.
Oh yeah. So I was like a surfer kid in a Catholic school. I was going down there, everything's pretty laid back in SF. It's like, hey, how you're doing? Everything down there is Rangers lead the way. And, there used to be this walkway that went from the battalion headquarters up to the medical section, which is where I worked. I was the NCOIC for 3rd Ranger Battalion's medical section. And I would have to make that walk a couple times every day to go to all the meetings and everything. And we used to call it the walk of scowl because all the guys, the Ranger Battalion, their jaw was all locked up tight. Their face was all harsh and, just looking miserable as could be. And, we would walk down through there. And for a while, I was like, hey, how's it going? And they're like, Rangers lead away. Everything was real super ultra serious the whole time. So it was a big adjustment, for there. And the worst part was there had been 2 other guys in the position there before me. And one of them, the very first guy, had gotten in trouble. And I think he was out of 3rd group. I don't remember for sure. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I only heard about him. I never met him. But he had actually gotten sent to military confinement because he had ammunition and demolition, C4, in his shed at the house. So he'd been stealing stuff from the Ranger Battalion and storing it in his shed for some reason. And then we had the guy after him who found out about the opening and came over and kind of slid in the position because he was already on post at Fort Benning for School of Americas. And his whole reason for coming over is he wanted to get this special assignment and try to make E8. And he couldn't pass the PT test. He couldn't do the ruck march. He couldn't do the pull-ups, because he was supposed to pass the fitness test and go to Ranger School. And then I showed up there and I got a 1-page continuity book from him. It was typed on lined notebook paper. And the only thing it told me was, like when the meetings were. So I had no idea about anything that was going on. And I went to like my first company training meeting and the company commander introduced me. Hey, this is Sergeant McElwee. He's our new Special Forces medic running the med shed. And, it's kind of a dog-eat-dog world there. And one of the guys, like straight out said, well, what kind of criminal are you? And having come from, the SF team area, I said, well, I'm a murderer. I just haven't been caught yet. And, so I had to give it back to him pretty good. And luckily, the thing that really kind of saved me there is I'd had some background in developing the Combatives program at 5th Group. And so we had a couple events that happened to where there was some combatives. And so I actually had to, put some throwdown on a couple guys to actually prove that I wasn't this guy who couldn't do pull-ups and I wasn't this criminal, that was unprofessional. So the guys before me had left this really unprofessional taste in their mouth, and they don't exactly love SF guys anyway. They don't, they don't trust us. They think we're unprofessional, and these guys did nothing but prove that. So the whole time I got there initially, I was busy trying to earn my reputation with them. They had no respect for me. They didn't think much of me. I was just another SF loser. And the only thing that turned it around for me is I went to another one of those meetings and I kept seeing this thing on the schedule that said MEDEX, and I was like, what's this MEDEX? And it's like, oh, that's the medical exercise that you guys are going to do. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And so, I asked around a little bit and I was like, hey, what's this medical exercise we're doing? And they're like, well, it's whatever you make. And I was like, what? And it's like, yeah, you're responsible for it. It's whatever you come up with to train the medics. And this was the first I'd heard of it. And we were now about a month out from this, training exercise. So I started looking into it to find out, well, what assets do we have? What's the scenario? What's the plan? And there was nothing done. Nobody had initiated or started anything. And the one thing I found out was initially there had been a request to get some helicopter support from Task Force 160 to do this medical exercise. And so I went to the S3 Air. At the time, it was Matt Eversman from Black Hawk Down, awesome guy. And I was talking to him and I was like, hey, Sergeant Eversman, what's the deal with this MEDEX and the helicopters? And he's like, well, we sent your request up and the guys are doing this and that, and you're not going to get any helicopters. So, you got nothing. And then I was like, okay. And then I asked him, well, okay, your S3 training, do we have a training area? And he's like, no, nobody requested anything. You guys don't have anything. So the more I looked into this exercise, the more I found out there was nothing coordinated for it at all. This guy who had been there before me had done zero. So, I started looking around. The first thing I did was I got in my pickup truck because, I asked him about, well, what about other, helicopter units on post? And he said, well, there's a medevac unit, there's a National Guard unit, and, his assistant air called him up while I was sitting there and asked him about that. I said, hey, this is 3rd Ranger Battalion. We'd like to task and use some of your helicopters. And, it was a real short conversation. And he got off, he goes, yeah, they said no. And I was like, what? What do you mean they said no? And so I asked him, I was like, well, where's the unit at? What unit is it? So I got in my pickup truck and I drove to the other side of post. I went over there and talked to him in person, met him, said, hey, I'm Sergeant McElwee from 3rd Ranger Battalion. I know you guys got some helicopters. I was wondering, we'd really like to do some training with you, maybe train some of your guys on, some of our stuff. We'd like to work with you. What can we do? And the fact that I went there in person and talked to the guy was really open to it. And so, I got this National Guard helicopter unit, and I did the same thing with the medevac unit that said, hey, we're training the medics. We'd like to work with you guys. And so then the other piece was we didn't have a training area. And same thing happened. I asked, well, where can we do a training area? What can we use? And they have an area there called McKenna Mount Site, which is a really excellent training facility. And, I came up with the concept that what we would do is kind of do a take on, a follow-up from the incident with Black Hawk Down, to where urban environment, you've got people trapped inside the city, and we've got casualties. Let's work on some scenarios for the medics to run through their triage, deal with casualties on the ground. And then we will evacuate those casualties. We'll role play the casualties as down pilots or, other members that are stuck in an urban environment, and then we'll evacuate them out by helicopter. And so I found out that one of the officer training schools on post had McKenna Mount Site for the time we were trying to do. And so same thing, we called up, asked for co-usage, and they're like, no. So I went over in person again, got my little gray Ranger pickup truck, drove over, said, hey, I'm Sergeant McElwee. We'd like to work with you guys. Maybe we could exchange some training, train you guys, on some tactics or something. what can we do to work out co-usage on this McKenna Mount site that you have? And they're like, oh yeah, no problem. So they signed off for co-usage for us. And then about a week later, they actually fell out and just gave it to us. I don't know what changed in their schedule, but they didn't need the area. So now I had a training area. I had aircraft. And so I got support from within the Ranger Battalion for Op 4, and then a couple platoons to serve as, search to do mount clearing through the city to find the casualties with the medic attached to them to do the scenarios. And then I also found out that one of the guys I knew was an SF guy on a Halo team. They were coming down to Fort Benning to do some training. So, I asked him, hey, would you guys want to do a scenario with us? And they were coming in from 7th Group, had some things set up. And I said, I coordinated with them to be another SAR team to look for the down pilot in the city. So what I had set up was we would alternate teams. We'd alternate a Ranger platoon with the SF ODA. A team would fly in, or a platoon, on the National Guard helicopters. They'd put them down. They'd move through the city, get the medics to the casualties. The medics would treat the casualties, and then we would call in the medevac birds, and they would, use the jungle penetrator or the Stokes litter, and they would evac them out. So, and then the teams would exfil. And I had it set up so that we would do these constant rotations between teams and medics, and then, the other SF medics were in charge of grading the trauma scenarios, just like we do in our 300 F1, and do the moulage and set up the fake casualties and all that. So once I briefed this back to the, to the commander, the battalion commander at the time, Colonel Kearney, great guy, very impressive commander. And, he came out and watched it the first day we were doing it. And we had a whole week of this training that was laid on to go through this rotation. And after he saw it the first day, he was impressed with it. So he ordered all the Ranger Company commander, all the officers to come out there, watch it, and get like a walkthrough. So I spent my whole week doing the dog and pony show with the visitors folder, walking them all through the scenarios. But after that, I finally earned enough respect from the guys at the Ranger Battalion because of the way I organized the training event. And the bottom line is that the Ranger medics did great. The other SF medics that were working with me made the whole thing come off seamlessly, and, executed the idea that I had, done the drug deals to get everybody in position for. And it came off really well. And the commander was pretty happy with it. And so after that, they treated me, almost like one of their own a little bit. And then, we did a couple of joint missions with some of the JSOC units right after that. And then we had one that involved some chemical casualty care. And so they needed a medical liaison to work with the JSOC guys. And so I worked with them as the liaison. And then after that, for all the joint rotations and exercises, they would request me to be the liaison. I had the SF experience. I was a little bit older than a lot of the guys that they might normally interface with. And so they kind of treated me pretty well and would request me to do that. So it turned out to be a pretty good deal, during those things.
One thing I'd like to ask you, and the sense I get from talking to guys, particularly the 70s into the 80s, and in your case in the 90s, that back in the day before SF became a branch, back before the Ranger Regiment got very formalized and SF got very formalized and USASOC and SOCOM and everything, that back in the older days, it was a little bit more possible for someone to bounce between the Rangers and SF throughout their career. What do you think about that kind of exchange? Do you think that that's like a good, healthy thing to have during a person's career progression?
So, it's one of those things that's real experience being what you get when you get something you don't necessarily ask for. Yeah. And I went there, to be honest, for the wrong reasons. I went there to get out of going to civil affairs, but it turned out to be really great experience for me, because the whole time I had been in SF, I always got this, pushback and ridicule for being an SF baby, because I had no conventional experience, and people would, shove that at me all the time. I never saw it as a problem, but, the truth is, in the beginning it was, because I didn't have the experience that I should have to kind of start things. But it also gives an interesting blend of perspective, right? Because I thought outside the box because I'd never been in the box. So it adds something to the team to have these perspectives of guys that don't know the rules for doing what you do. And, so sometimes you come up with some crazy concepts on how things should be executed, but it keeps your thinking unconventional, which I think is a really good thing. Now, the other side of it is I went to the Ranger Battalion, and man, you talk about being out of your element because, they are at the time were ultra conventional with the high and tight, spit shine boots all the time, starched uniform, everything, dress right dress. And I was okay until we had formations or had to do drill and ceremony. And you know how that is with an SF guy. I did not shine. Those were not my great moments. Luckily, they were few and far between. But as far as going into a position and actually getting some leadership experience and having a little different look as far as what these young troops do, because man, they're serious, highly motivated. And so I really enjoyed it. I got some great leadership background out of it. I got some huge appreciation for how wonderful SF is. When I came back to SF after that, I realized, what a good deal it was. And the pace at the Ranger Regiment is just nonstop.
Yeah.
And it's even when you're, it's different in SF because you're deploying, you're gone all the time. But a lot of times when you're home, you're kind of left alone. Well, the Ranger Battalion, you're never left alone, especially if you're part of the leadership, because you've got all these young kids to look after, to take care of. You're bailing them out of jail, you're getting them out of trouble, you're managing their whole lives, you're giving them marriage counseling. So it's a lot of demand for leadership, and it's really great experience. It set me up well to be a team sergeant and to appreciate how good things are in SF. So, I didn't see the bouncing back and forth, because that happened probably right before I got in. When I got in, like I said, I went to Fort Sam. We had some guys that had come from the Ranger Battalion, and mainly when I was in the initial medic course for just combat medic, there was an SF guy from 7th Group and a guy from the Ranger Battalion. I still remember the guy from Ranger Battalion. His name is Sergeant Welch. And, so when I got to the medic course, I really looked up to those guys because I was like, man, that's what I want to do. And it was nice later to be able to come full circle and check that block, and then go to SF training, be a special forces guy, and then go to Ranger Battalion, even though it's kind of back-asswards, which is maybe the way I do things anyway. But it set me up to go down there and, get that unique experience. And what made it a little more challenging for me is I was an SF guy down there without a Ranger tab. So I was not Ranger qualified while I was there.
Oh, that must have gone over well.
Oh, they did not love that. And it was always interesting because, they always did what we called sniffing. They were always trying to look at your shoulder to see what you had. And we used to even kind of tease them and always rotate away from them. So they had to look for it. And luckily, though, I had an SF combat patch. So that gave me a little bit of respect. But
yeah, you had a CIB.
Inevitably, every now and then they would mention the fact that, hey, hey, Sergeant Mac, you don't have a Ranger tab. And I was like, I don't need a Ranger tab. I got an SF tab. I got the D tab. So I had to give it back to them. But they had a valid point. I was missing a key part of their identity.
Did you end up having to go to Ranger school?
So the deal when I went down there was supposed to be for me to get to go to Ranger school. And, so when I showed up down there, it was all set up. I was supposed to go to Ranger school. I had a slot that was coming up. And they came to me and said, hey, the doctor, he's been here longer than you. He hasn't got to go to Ranger school yet. We want to send him. And I was like, well, what can I say? I mean, he's been here longer than me. Yeah, I mean, it's fine. I'll go to the next class. And so he went, and I think at the time it was toward the winter. And after my Pakistan experience, I was like, sure, let him go to the winter class. I'll wait. But, and then the next thing that happened, though, is right after that, I came down with orders to go to the SF ANOC, which, I needed for promotion to E8. And so I was like, well, I got to go to that. So I wound up choosing ANOC at Fort Bragg over going to Ranger School. And then by the time I got back, I didn't have enough time left to go. And so I didn't get to go.
Yeah.
I never went. And it's one of those kind of, bittersweet things. I wanted to go, but evidently I wasn't meant to go. And
and you needed to do.
I probably would have got recycled a dozen times.
You needed a knock so you could get promoted to E8 and take a team.
Right. Yeah, I had to have it. And then, I came back from ANOC, and then not long after that, the E8 list came out. And so I was on the list, and my time was up at the Ranger Battalion.
And what was it like going back to 5th Group? What was the team that you took?
So I went back initially. One of the cool things about the Ranger Battalion is they live by the regulations. So if you can dive into the regulations and find out how to use them to your advantage, you are a master of that domain. And in true SF style, I figured out that one of the requirements they had, because I was an SF guy and I was getting language pay because I was a 2+ in Persian Farsi. Well, I discovered that, hey, they have to send me to a set amount of language training every year. And I brought this up, and they're like, oh, and as soon as they found out, there was a scramble. Like, you got to go. We got to get you signed off on this. We don't want to get in trouble with SOCOM or whatever. And so they figured out that they didn't have a Persian language program on Fort Benning, so I couldn't go there. And so they actually came back to me and said, well, where are we going to send you? You're going to go to Monterey, whatever. I said, well, there's training at 5th Group in Fort Campbell. And so they sent me back to a language immersion training for a month at 5th Group before I was about to head back to be reassigned to 5th Group. And so when I went back there, I started scoping out for a job. I knew that, I needed to find a team sergeant position in order to have a place in life when I got back. Well, as it turned out, when I came back, the guy that had been my team sergeant for the mounted team, Dave Brace, was a company sergeant major. And, as I was going around kind of letting everybody know I was there, letting them make fun of me with my Ranger haircut after being on the long hair team and my black beret and giving me, a lot of crap about all that, I ran into him and he said, hey, what's going on? And I said, well, I'm just doing language training. I'm about done with my time at Ranger Battalion. I'm going to be coming back to 5th Group. And he's like, oh, okay, really? Well, I'd like you to take a team in the company. And it was A Company, 2nd Battalion. And I was like, well, yeah, sure. What's the deal? And he goes, well, I think you're perfect for it. And I was like, well, wait a minute. What do you mean? What are you not telling me? And so this team had gotten in trouble and had 2 major incidents, right? Like international level incidents. One of them was while they were in Kuwait, they had decided that they were going to exercise their redneck roots, and driving down the road in the Humvee, they were going to shoot road signs across the hood. Well, in doing that, they actually, put around through the hood of the Humvee. And then they went back to KKMC, and as they're going through the gate, one of the MPs noticed the bullet hole in the hood and asked him, well, hey, what happened here? And one of the guys, who was like a total dumbass, said, oh, we took some fire up on the border. Well, that quickly went up the chain and I think went all the way to the president. And it was a major incident, that wound up getting a couple guys relieved and really messed up the team. But also somewhere in there, they had another incident where they were in Ethiopia and the team medic had died from an overdose of ketamine. And I don't know if it was a suicide or if he was, using it as recreational drug and just overdosed or something.
You were a medic. Isn't it really difficult to overdose on ketamine?
It's the only time I've ever heard of it in my entire medical career. It's not something that happens easily, but this was what I'd been told from coming back. And so I was like, man, this is, I was talking to my former team sergeant, the sergeant major, and I was like, I don't know about this. This is, you're asking a lot. And I said, well, I'll do it, because I want to work with you. I think you're awesome. I trust you, but you're going to have to back me up as the team sergeant. And it sounds like, I don't know if all those guys are going to be able to stay. If I have a problem and I want to kick somebody out, will you back me up? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. whatever you need, we'll do it. I want you to come back and straighten the team out. And so I was like, okay, I'll do it. And when I came back initially, I came back and they put me on the B team, and then deployed as the L&O for that team on a like a graded exercise, so that they were doing like a certification out to El Paso, but nobody knew that I was coming back to take over the team. They had another team sergeant that had been there during some of these things that happened, and so I was kind of doing undercover boss thing and observing them, working through them while they're in isolation to fly out and deploy to El Paso and do these scud hunting missions, which I had some experience with, especially after at one point we had done some joint tactical development with the CAG guys on scud hunting with the mobility. So I had a good bit of background in that area. And mainly I was just kind of observing them from a leadership standpoint, an organizational standpoint, to see, what's the problem with this team? What can I do? What can I bring to the table to kind of fix them? And so they also got, at the time, they got another warrant officer in who had worked with me, in the same company in 2nd Battalion in Charlie Company previously. So we knew each other as well. He had been a weapons guy. I was there when he came in, and now he had gone through the warrant course and was a warrant officer, a guy named Larry Corrigan, great guy. And so, we were excited to be working together. He found out a little bit, like right after that deployment that I was going to be coming to the team. And then not long after they finished their evaluation and their deployment, they rotated the team sergeant out and put me in, and I took over the team. So it was ODA 542. And so that was my first team as the team sergeant. And turned out to be a really great team. I had some great guys. I was there probably about a week when I had to fire a guy. And interesting enough, it was the medic. I came back and it was probably the wrong time to try to challenge me, because I'd just come from the Ranger Battalion. I'd spent the last 2 years like butting heads with those guys, trying to prove that I was professional. I knew what I was doing. So I had to kind of learn a lot of this stuff by the book. And when I came back, I'd spent time while I was at the Ranger Battalion. I'd been an instructor for one of their battalion-wide combatives courses. So I brought that back to the team. That was going to be part of what I did. And I came in with a real emphasis. One of the things that we had that was part of ROPE when we went through, or the Ranger Indoctrination Program, is we were all sent to watch the classified aerial video from Black Hawk Down, from the, where the Shugart and Gordon actually took the crash site and where they were overrun and killed. And so having seen all that, it kind of put a new perspective on things for me, as far as, hey, we need to be taking things really seriously as far as, shooting, communicating, unarmed combat, because bullets, magazines run out, and sometimes you don't have another option. So I was pretty gung-ho on all those kind of things, starting with fitness, shooting, combatives. Those were my directives for the team, as I really came in wanting to make it the most professional I could. And so when I first came in and took over, one of the things I did was I made sure everybody had their D-bags packed, packing list. I went through all the basic stuff, right? Here's a packing list. Make sure you have this. Okay, we're going to do all the layouts for the equipment. I need to see the medical gear, all that stuff. And, I kind of got a little pushback initially. And so I used an old trick that I learned, and I set it up for Friday. And so, a couple of the guys got it together. And so what I did was I checked their gear. Everything looked good. It was Friday morning, right after PT. I dismissed them for the weekend. I was like, okay, take off. I got to, I had two other guys. I got to one who was the medic, and he, kind of blew me off. And I'd already given my introductory spiel that, hey, look, I know it's a new environment, new change. This is what we're going to be doing. This is what I expect. If it doesn't fit for you, let me know. Come see me. I'll find you another place in SF. And so when I started looking at the medical stuff, it was a mess. The guy was as unprofessional as he could be. And he basically told me, well, hey, I don't think this is going to work out. And I was like, okay, grab your stuff. And I took him down the hall right away to see the Sergeant Major. And I said, hey, Sergeant Major, I want this guy off my team. And he, true to his word, Dave Brace backed me up. he was gone by the end of the day. And, that was it. And we mentioned earlier talking about the guy who had gotten blown up in Somalia in the vehicle with the landmine. Well, this guy, I believe, was in the vehicle with him when that happened. So,
wow.
I really hated to kind of kick him off the team, but his attitude was just, he was done. He was burnt out. He didn't want to do anything challenging. And he was part of the problem.
I'd like to ask you, what were sort of the leadership problems or the organizational problems that you identified on that team? Obviously, firing that guy was kind of the first step of laying down the law, but what did you kind of have to do over the months to get that team turned around?
So the biggest thing when I went is because these guys had gone through these incidents, they had some guys that were brand new, and then they had a few guys with a little bit of experience. So overall, they were a pretty young team. But the guys that had been there, their ego was crushed. They just felt like losers because they'd been part of this team and they'd been labeled because of these incidents that they were just a bunch of losers. So they had no pride in themselves. And so we started with just the basics. We came in, we started doing, intense PT and started building the guys up. And I kind of let them know, I tried to use a very incentive-based program. I put out, a school's OML, order merit list right away so that they knew, hey, these are the things you're working for. And some of them were new. And I did all the basic things of just, counseling. So I came in, sat down with all the guys within that 30 days initially, did initial counseling. I was real clear coming from the Ranger Battalion about like, hey, this is what I expect. I handed out all the items of, hey, this is what the team's going to be about. And I really just kind of started off by telling them this is going to be the best damn team in 5th Group. And, that was my approach. I wanted to do that. And I also kind of let them know that, look, I understand you guys had it tough before. I've been in 5th Group a long time. I got a lot of experience here. It's a great place to be. You just haven't seen it yet. And I understand because when I first got to 5th Group, I didn't think it was great either. But it took some time for somebody to show me that. And then I just kind of started making sure that we went through all the basic steps to make sure the guys were dialed in and they were brilliant at the basics. That's really what we focused on. And after probably about 3 months, they started to really kind of dial in and get like, a sense of pride. And part of that came initially from the fact that every Tuesday and Thursday, I had them doing combatives. We were doing military combatives. And initially, it didn't go over well the first couple times because the first time, I went through a real quick lesson of what we call the punching drill. You trade punches, and I did this drill called offense versus defense. And for the first minute, if you're offense, you can punch, and the other guy can't punch you back. All he can do is block and evade and defend. And then you switch, the other guy gets to be offense and punch. And then the last minute, it's both ways. So you guys get to, to go at it pretty hard. Well, I used a card system to where you could draw cards, and I kind of stacked the deck. And another part of it is they had a real young team leader. He had just gotten there, and the, his young captain, and I think it was his first deployment when one of these things happened. So they didn't relieve him because, he really hadn't been there that long. But I think it hurt his ego as well. He didn't really know his place in it. And so I stacked the cards for sparring, and I made sure that I went up against the captain. And to be honest, I nailed him, and I videoed all the training. I still have the videos. And, so I kicked him in the head. I made it a pretty rugged experience for the guys that, hey, we're serious. And then after that, I took him aside and I let him know, listen, you and I are a team. We're going to make these guys really, professional. We're going to be warriors, not just guys that sit around the team room. And so once I kind of convinced them that was going to be the new attitude of the team, a lot of the guys started to buy into it. They got their pride back. They started really digging into their job. And we got a couple of brand new guys as that was happening, and it kind of turned the team around. And I had a lot of support from, the other guy that was the warrant officer, Larry Corrigan. He and I knew each other really well and, worked together really well as far as establishing some strong leadership because he came in like just before I did. So we had a new leadership component. We kind of got the captain on board with us, and then the team started to gel after that.
That's pretty cool. And did you get to take that team abroad at all?
Yeah, we actually got to go. We got several pretty good missions. We did one trip that was pretty cool to Jordan, where we actually did some. We did some live fire, call for fire with a B-1 bomber, and we did a complete navigation through Wadi Rum with the Jordanian forces, and then hit a live fire target and called the B-1 CAS in on it. We went. We went to Qatar together. We did a 6-month rotation in Kuwait as well. So we got to do quite a bit of stuff, and that all kind of fed into the team developing as well, because we earned a couple of missions. Like after that, we had to brief back for a couple things, and actually got awarded the mission, and the guys started getting some real pride in what they were capable of.
And I guess because you did a pretty good job turning the team around, they gave you a second one.
Well, it worked out really well. So after that, we changed sergeant majors, and I was blessed to get another awesome sergeant major, a guy by the name of Kip Hopkemeyer, who's just, like another stellar, at the time, he was another legend in 5th Group that had been there forever. And the whole time I'd been working on convincing the group to really get behind this combatives program. And so I had, been taking a couple guys from my team, and we were going and training with the Gracies, that created the UFC and stuff like that. And then we would come back. I was training my team, and then we would also invite and train other teams with that. And I convinced the sergeant major to support me on that. And then because I had that background, I had expressed some interest. They were asking me, well, hey, what do you want to do next? And they tried to talk me into taking support company and doing a lot of other things, because they were trying to track me for sergeant major. And I was like, well, I really love being a team sergeant. I wish I could do it longer. And it just came up that one of those special projects teams, it's the joint team that is actually 2 ODAs combined. And that was going to be a vacant position. And because I had the special projects experience before, I also had all that interface and interaction with the guys from CAG from both my time at Ranger Battalion and the joint training we had done for the mobility development. To go with that, the team that was in question had actually been in the Kenyan embassy when it was bombed.
Oh, shit.
And so, these guys were going to a lot of places and winding up in some pretty, hazardous environments. And most of the time they didn't have the benefit of weapons. So this kind of fed into the idea of me working with all the unarmed and knife combat stuff. And so the sergeant major, talked to me and asked me, how I felt about that. And I said, man, that would be an honor. I'd love to do it. I can't think of anything better. If you consider me, I would definitely, I'd really appreciate it. I'd be up for that. And so I got put on the short list and considered for it. And they selected me to go run that other special projects team, which was a joint team of 2 ODAs.
That's pretty cool. And
yeah,
so
it was awesome.
That it sounds like your job was kind of like getting the rest of the group trained up on these skills.
So I had made it my personal endeavor, as far as the combatives, because at the time it wasn't a popular concept for the whole group. In fact, there was a lot of resistance to it. Initially, we didn't even have like a room to train in. We started out, I would take my guys to the squash court at one of the gyms, and we would sign it out and use it to do the combatives training. So we had a hardwood floor. We weren't doing much ground stuff yet. And then the guy that was a warrant officer, Larry Corrigan, his daughter was heavily into gymnastics. And so he was an assistant coach for his daughter's gymnastics place. And he got it worked out for us to be able to use the gymnastics place at 6 a.m. on Tuesday and Thursday, this place called Tumbletown. So that's where we were going. What's funny about it is now Larry is in Clarksville and owns probably one of the biggest gymnastics gyms in the United States. He's huge in the gymnastics world. But so he set us up to go take the guys and train in the gymnastics area with the padded floor. And then we kind of worked out a side deal to where we signed out a room in the ISOFAC, and we laid down some foam, went to DRMO, the Defense Reutilization, complex, and got a big sheet of canvas and then duct taped it over that. And we were doing this makeshift mat was our training area for combatives in our isolation facility.
That room in the ISOFAC was still there when that combatives room in the ISOFAC was still there, at least when I showed up around like 2007.
Yeah, so we did the makeshift room, and we kind of laid it out so that one day we had a visiting general, I think it was from USAFIC, and he was doing a tour with the group commander, and we weren't supposed to be there, but we made sure we had a few guys in there training, and we had a guy standing outside, and when the general started walking by, we opened up the door and went through a little pre-rehearsed routine we were doing to make it look good. And so the general came in, saw what we were doing, and he asked the group commander, he's like, he was talking to us, and he goes, "Oh, how come you guys are training on this canvas?" I was like, "Well, hey, that's all we got, sir." And so he put the group commander on the spot and say, "Hey, these guys need a training room. I'll pay half, but you're going to have to fund the other half." The group commander was pissed. He was super pissed because we committed him for this money. He wasn't real happy about it. But we wound up from that getting a dedicated combatives room, which is probably the one you saw with the green wrestling mats and the fifth group logo or like writing on it.
I want to say
I had set that up.
Red mats on the walls, maybe, if I remember.
No,
correctly.
that was the second one in the that was in the medical therapeutic center, because it couldn't be called a combatives room or something.
Shit, real? Is it? Damn, maybe you're right. Well, you'd know better than I would.
Well, my memory's not always that good anymore, but initially we had these dark green wrestling mats that, I worked a deal to get them wholesale, and they're brand new, but we put them in there, and we had like a rope along one edge, so it looked kind of like a ring. And then we had the padded walls and everything. So we finally got a combatives room that we were able to train in. And so, I kept taking my team there, even with the special project guys. I would take them there on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we would invite other teams to train with us. And by this time, I had put the program I developed into an actual training manual. So I had it laid out. That's how I convinced the command to pay for me to go train with the Gracies. And then we actually brought, Hori and Gracie in for a week of training to teach the guys and do an instructor course in June of 2001. So right before 9/11 kicked off. And then, and we were actually in the training room. I was in that room teaching combatives and working with my guys on 9/11 when the planes struck the towers in the Pentagon and went down in Pennsylvania.
And I mean, that kicked things off for fifth group in a big way, obviously.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So up until then, I was kind of on the downhill cycle of finishing up my team sergeant time. I think I might have had maybe 9 months left at the most with the special projects team sergeant job. And they had worked it out. I was going to become the ISOFAC manager, the hotel manager is what they used to always call it. And then I would do the training for all the teams in the group. And there was some discussion even that, hey, we'd even like to turn this into a civilian position for you afterwards, after you retire, because I was getting close to retirement. And they, that was kind of the plan. I had my life all figured out. And then the planes crashed. And then that day, everything spun up. Everybody started, packing up, loading out, and getting ready to figure out what we were going to do next to resolve that issue.
And where did that take you and your team?
So our team right away, we locked down the first day and started getting, doing teleconference calls with SOCOM. And then the leadership immediately deployed to McDill to do some command planning with them and figure out how that was going to work for us. And then we kept some missions that were still involved as part of the rotation. We went, and the interesting part about it is we were actually in Peshawar, Pakistan, along the Afghan border in June of 2001, so right before the incident. And at the time, we were working with we had some things working with the State Department, then the embassy there, that were related to trying to figure out where Osama bin Laden was. But, we had a pretty minor role overall, but we were in there as part of that mission anyway. And then we spun up, went to MacDill, and then we went on a couple other deployments that were located in surrounding countries, mostly north of Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and then also Turkmenistan. So we were in several of those areas there throughout that time.
I mean, and that's kind of it still is a bit of a Wild West in some of those places.
Yeah, it's a really interesting part of the world. I mean, you got the extremes. You got Kazakhstan, which is like New York City with everybody speaking Russian. The capital there is a major city, and it's kind of like the Twilight Zone because everybody's there speaking Russian, but it looks like a major U.S. city.
I was in Almaty last year, and
yes,
I mean, it feels like you could be like in a coffee shop in Brooklyn.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got Turkmenistan where it's very Wild West and extremely strange, but very unique. And they speak their own Persian dialect there that's pretty close. So I was able to communicate with them while we were there. It was some pretty cool experience to get to go to those countries. It's probably the best part of the 5th Group area.
Were you guys mostly kind of like working on setting up the logistics for everything going down into Afghanistan?
So we were still completely involved in a Joint Chief of Staff directed mission. And a lot of it, like we were working through the embassies in those different countries. So we really didn't have anything to do directly with 5th Group.
Interesting. Are you allowed Can you talk about what you were doing at that time?
So we were indirectly supporting a JSOC endeavor.
Gotcha. And so you were traveling around that part of the world under basically working for SOCOM. And how long did that go on for?
So let's see. I think I had that team sergeant gig for. We were doing that part like after 9/11. I was with them until, let's see, for about a year.
Okay.
For the first part of that, and then my team sergeant time was up, and for me there was a lot of pressure to take like a group operations job or one of the other things like that, but. For me, at that time, we'd had the incident with the guys that were killed in the friendly fire incident, and 2 of my good friends died in that. Dan Pettitori and JD Davis. So I was kind of at a point to where I'm not sure how familiar you are with the incident, but it was really some
when the
officer
call for fire,
mix-up.
Yeah, when they called in an airstrike.
Yeah, they called in an airstrike that wiped out the team, ODA 574. And those guys, were really good friends of mine. So at the time, I really wasn't too big on continuing to work with the way things were. We were also getting a lot of flack from our battalion commander because we didn't answer to him as part of the special project team. And he was constantly, like on me as the team sergeant, telling me that, I need to tell the general that we're not going to do the special project. And I was like, you expect me as an E8 to tell a 3-star general that we're not going to do what he wants done. I think maybe you need to do some, officer math and go talk to him yourself, or maybe have somebody hire, because I don't have that kind of clout. That's not my position to tell him what to do. He tells me what to do. And he really wasn't in favor of us as the special project from the beginning, which is kind of sad because all my guys ever did was make him look good. They came back with letters of commendation from the ambassadors and guys from from Department of State. And even a couple times I'd go in and give an after action a post-trip report to them, let them know, hey, this, things, we went here, we did this is good. Here are the accommodations from the ambassador and, from SOCOM. Be really great, sir, if you went down and kind of tell the guys who did a great job. And he just wouldn't do it. He had no respect for us and didn't care for the mission at all. He was really down on us. So working for him was at that time, and he couldn't, once the war kicked off, he didn't have us, for tactical control to task to do some of the missions. And
the commanders
it put him
get
at a disadvantage.
The commanders, I think the battalion commanders get kind of irritated when they have a special projects team. The SIF was another element that was in this category
Right.
because they're mostly working for JSOC. And who were back in the old days, also the green light team, that was another thing that just sucked up all these resources. And when you're assigned to another element like that, it means that the commander cannot task out his teams to do things.
Yeah.
And so they hate these kinds of special projects.
Oh yeah, this guy hated us severely. He and all we ever did was make him look good, but he did not like that at all. And so it was a constant battle. And then after that happened, I was kind of disheartened as far as sticking with 5th Group. And, I'd always been taught by all these guys that I'd learned from all the years that, if you've got a problem, you need to have a solution. And so I started looking at it and I was like, my problem here is leadership, officer leadership. What can I do about it? I'm an NCO. How can I impact this in any way possible? And the answer I came up with is, I can go teach future officers at ROTC. And so I got my choice of assignment after Afghanistan. And we were, the project was closely connected to the SIF. It was it was labeled the RST, or the Regional Survey Team.
Oh yeah.
So that was kind of the responsibility there. And like I said, I got my choice of assignment, so I checked out a couple things. And the one I ended up with, probably because I'd been at Fort Benning in Georgia before, is I went to the University of Georgia. I actually came here and checked it out right before I went on my last mission. So I showed up with long hair, facial hair, looking like a street person, and toured the campus. The guy who was in the position already was a former support medic from Delta. He and I had gone to medic training together, so I knew him, and he kind of showed me around. The job looked interesting enough, and so I decided, what, I'll take this. I went back and put in for it, and then did my last overseas deployment with the team, and then shortly after that I came back and moved down to Athens, Georgia. Been here ever since.
Oh, great. So you were able to, find a good position to kind of ride out your last year or so in the military.
Yeah, and it's really the big lie, because they make it sound like, oh, you'll be home, you got all this free time and everything. And I guess you could do it that way, but when I got here, one of the things I saw was the kids were really motivated. Most of them had signed up because of 9/11, so they were anxious to go out there and make a difference. They were different from a lot of the youth that you were seeing everywhere else. And so the key there was to take the job seriously and really try to train them and make good leaders out of them. So it takes up a lot of your weekends, which they don't tell you about. You're doing a lot of training thing with them on the weekend. You're in every morning at 6 a.m. running PT for them. You're there a lot of times late at night. And then they were just like my Rangers, they were calling me 24/7. I couldn't go to the bathroom without one of them following me in there. I'd have to order them out so I could actually use the bathroom for 5 minutes. But, they're like your own kids. So it was a good experience overall to work with them and to see folks that wanted to be motivated leaders and to impart to them while they're still listening about what a difference they can make and how they need to be a strong leader and work with their NCOs.
And for the last 20 years, we've kind of touched upon it throughout this interview, but martial arts is obviously a big part of your life. Your black belt certification behind you there. Jiu-jitsu, Army combatives, developing all of that. And you've kind of flipped that into a business after your military career.
Yeah, so one of the things I found is I was on my second marriage, and we waited 10 years to have my son, and he was born in 2000. So the plan was I was winding down. I had my son. I had two kids from the first marriage, and completely detached from them, disoriented. That didn't work out too well. So I didn't want to mess it up again. So I wanted to have that time with my son, and he was less than a year old. He was born in October 2000. So when it came to 9/11, he wasn't even a year old yet. I thought I was kind of winding down, and that I was going to do that family thing and work with, grow up, have him grow up with me. And then all of a sudden, I was gone a lot. A lot of things were crazy. So I decided once I got out or started to get out that I was going to make sure I was home and I was going to have that time with him. So I started looking at options, and a lot of the things I was offered were all contract jobs that would keep me doing what I'd been doing in
Yeah.
special projects or other things like that. And, big numbers as far as salary and money and all that. But I really had a priority to have that time with him and be there, as he grew up. So I finally settled on the fact that, hey, I was going to open up a jiu-jitsu academy. At the time, it was a karate academy. And that allowed me to bring him to work with me every day, to spend all that time with him. I took a huge pay cut. So,
Yeah.
first one to go from SF to ROTC, and then, another one to retire, and then not, and then to start your own business.
And that
Definitely another pay cut.
that government contracting money as the GWAT was picking up was very tempting for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I like almost said yes a few times.
Yeah.
It was really tough.
And so you're down in Georgia, you said. Open
Yes,
up
sir.
karate gym, becomes a jujitsu gym. I mean, how does it go? What are some of like the road bumps and hurdles that you have starting a small business? Because I know there always are.
Oh, absolutely. So the first problem is I'd worked for the government for over 20 years. So I didn't know how to make a profit. All I knew how to do was spend other people's money. And so I had no clue about running a business. But luckily, all that time in special forces, you learn how to come up with things that nobody knows how to do and you don't know how to do yourself. So I started figuring it out, and I had done, I in my spare time at Fort Campbell, I had been a karate instructor. I already had my black belt. I did that as my part-time recreation when I wasn't gone all the time. And so I started off with that, and I had developed this relationship with the Gracies, and actually got my blue belt, which is the first major thing. And at the time, there weren't many blue belts in America, especially American ones.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like having a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I had gotten mine from Hoist Gracie, which was, the guy who won the first few UFCs, knew his brother pretty well that had started all of it. So I started working, having Jiu-Jitsu and karate at my academy. And I also did the logical SF thing. I started going, okay, there's got to be a school for this. And, the answer was there's an MBA program. And I was like, no, that's not what I'm looking for. I want an actual school that teaches me how to run a martial arts school. So I started looking around, and I found training opportunities for that. I started reading all the books I could about business. But the main thing I did was, just like I did in SF, is I started putting everything into a training curriculum. First, one for that I already had for training combatives. So that was my outline to do the training. And then I started building a business curriculum, because I figured out pretty quick that it doesn't matter how good you are at martial arts or the technical side of anything. You got to know the business piece in order to, one, be able to eat, two, be able to keep it open, and, three, to keep it going. And so I started learning that. And as I did, I kind of built it all into my own business manual. And one of the things I figured out fairly early on is, man, I'm not a businessman. I tried initially. I was like, I tried to be a businessman, and it didn't take long before I figured out I'm not a businessman. I'm an SF guy. So I had to reorient my thinking to the idea that I'm an SF guy on a mission to run a martial arts business. And once I made that switch and I started doing everything the same way I did to run a team and to do SF missions, then it started to click for me and things started to progress. So I started building it into my own version of running a business.
Right.
And it's
Right.
developed into this program I have now called Going Commando. And it's all about taking these SF principles and military concepts and applying them to business and using some of those things that we're really, good at that we take for granted because it's just built into everything we do. The planning, the technical side of developing that and having all these specialties through the different MOSs and all the mission preparation, it's easily converted into business concepts that make it work really well.
What was it like? I got to ask, like your whole career, you've been training soldiers in hand-to-hand combat, and now I imagine you have everything from a teenage kid that comes in wants you to teach him how to be a killer to a parent coming in saying, "Can you teach my 6-year-old daughter how to do karate?"
Yeah. So the nice thing is actually ROTC kind of worked as like a prisoner release halfway house for me. So I had to kind of, change my language a little bit, my demeanor, and I had to learn to do that SF thing and work with the indigenous people, which were academics at the university and mainly civilians. So I had to kind of adopt and adapt that, persona a little bit. The other part of it, though, is I was still really focused on having very serious, hard training. And as a result, for the majority of the time, and even still today, our Jiu-Jitsu Academy is primarily adults. Like most martial arts programs are like 80% kids. We've always been like 75 to 80% adults. So we've had this like unusual niche of adult training, which has included, training military and law enforcement, especially a lot of the local law enforcement. And then along the way, while I was in ROTC, I had I was teaching the military cadets combatives. And then one Monday morning, I had one of my female students come up to me and say, "Hey, Sergeant Mac, over the weekend, I was attacked and the stuff you taught us helped me escape an assault," And so when that happened, I was like, man, that's pretty serious, And I kind of observed some of the just lax security and the mistakes that a lot of the college kids were making on campus anyway. And I got together with one of the cadets who was in a sorority, and she was actually the first cadet I met when I came down here, still in civilian clothes on relaxed screaming standards to check out the job. And, it was kind of interesting because I went out to observe their training. They were out in this, this area that's kind of like our Matamale at Fort Bragg, but it's a intramural fields, and they've got these paths they run on. And this girl had ran into like a low-hanging limb and split her head open, and she wouldn't come out. She finished the run and then came back, and then myself and the other staff at ROTC, who was a medic, we took her to the clinic on campus. So this was like my first interaction with one of the cadets. So this girl's tough as nails, right? So she got partnered up with me, and we created this program called SAFE, which is Sexual Assault Fundamental Escapes, that we first taught it to the military cadets, then we taught it to, a lot of the staff people on campus, and then we started teaching it to all the sororities on campus. And so I've been doing it for like over 20 years now, and it's such a popular program that we've actually traveled. Like 2 years ago, my son and I went to London, England to teach a version of it there. Last year, we went out to near Los Angeles, California, taught a version of it. In the last couple of years, I went to Detroit, Pennsylvania, and I go every year to UNC Chapel Hill to teach a version of it there, and have been doing that for like the last 12 years. And we do this in our own community. And then last year as well, we had an incident that was highly publicized on the news that an illegal immigrant killed a student on campus, a young lady by the name of Laken Riley. And so when that happened, that day we got 52 calls for these courses that we do. Wow. Obviously, we couldn't fill them all, but we did as many as we could. So all these types of specialty programs that I developed these curriculums for, kind of paid off because they had that SF flavor to them, and there was that realistic component. And even for a good while, a lot of people actually came in to train because of my SF background. So it actually served me pretty well.
Yeah. Where can people find your dojo? What's the name of it? Where can they find it? And where can they find Going Commando? Like if they want to find some of these services and safe, these things you're talking about.
Absolutely. So the best way to connect with us, if there's any interest in our Jiu-Jitsu Academy, it's Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Athens, or athensjujitsu.com. That's the easiest way to find that. And as far as Going Commando, if somebody wants to, connect with those concepts for business, I'm at, commandosuccess.com.
Cool. And the SAFE program?
And you can always find me, Randy McElwee on LinkedIn.
Oh, cool. Okay. And so that's probably the best way to find you personally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Okay. I know we've talked about a lot through this interview, Randy, but I want to just kind of backtrack just to say, is there anything that I haven't asked during this interview that you'd really like to talk about?
At this point, I think, working off of a 40-year-old memory, I definitely don't think we didn't cover everything. We didn't talk about anything. Unfortunately, I didn't get to talk to you about your background and experience. So, that's really the one thing I would ask is tell me real quick about your time.
It was I wrote a book about it if people are really interested. But yeah, I started off in Ranger Battalion. I was in 375.
Those are my guys.
Yeah, man. Got there in right after the invasion of Iraq in 2003. I got there, and then I went to SF. I went to the Q course in 2007. 2008, I got the 5th group, and then I was there for a few years and got out in 2010.
Excellent. Yeah. So I love my time in Ranger Battalion. I mean, it was a kind of a rough experience at the time, but I still remember all the things there. And I especially remember this one guy, that was the first sergeant. His name was First Sergeant Nielsen, and he recently passed away a few years ago. But the cool thing about it was I used to go to, he was my company first sergeant. So I had to go to the meeting, the training meeting once a week. And we used to call him the gun because you never knew when he would go off, right? So I would come in, I would get ready to sit down in front of his desk. I would maybe turn around, grab a notebook. And by the time I turned back around, he would be like just red as could be and yelling and screaming at me for no reason, like you damn SF guys. And I never knew what to expect. So, it was always just a blast to be with the guys at 375.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it's like doing like 12 years in SF and then going to Ranger Regiment. That's hilarious.
Yeah, it's definitely a hoot, but it, like I said, great experience and set me up well to be a team sergeant. So
if you guys are looking for Randy McElwee, you can find all the links down in the description to the things we talked about here, Going Commando, his jiu-jitsu dojo, all that good stuff. LinkedIn will all be down there. For those of you who are watching this on YouTube or listening to the podcast, you can check down in the description. Randy, thanks for taking all this time tonight to talk to us and walk us through your career and your story. It's a really unique experience.
Yeah, I appreciate it. The one thing that I notice over the years is there's a lot of guys like me that I call C students that have been in SF and all these things happen and you don't notice it until you go back to the 5th group reunion. I went to a couple of those and you talk to some of the guys and you realize that a lot of the new guys, they don't realize what a crazy wild world it was back before things, back before the money flowed and we were having to kind of, improvise.
Talk to some of the old guys about Bad Tolts or Fort Gulick in Panama and you will hear some stories. You will hear some real stories.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a good time.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. And thanks everyone who joined us today. We'll see you guys next time. And Randy, thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
Hey guys, I want to tell all of you today about a new newsletter that we're launching that encompasses both the Team House podcast, the Eyes On podcast, and the High Side news outlet, which I run with Sean Naylor. The newsletter is going to be once a week. It's going to come into your inbox, and you're going to get the most current podcasts on Eyes On and the Team House and whatever's topical or current on the high side. So it's another way for us to get the information out to you, as social media algorithms are pretty iffy and you never really know what you're going to get. So this is a once a week email. It'll slide into your inbox and it will have, the greatest hits of that week.
It's really good, man. I'm checking it out.
The website for it is teamhousepodcast.kit.com/join. teamhousepodcast.kit.com/join. You go there and you enter into your email list, or you enter your email into the little thing on the website, and you're good to go. And that'll be it. So we really appreciate your support and hope you'll consider signing up.
Where's the link?
The link will also be down in the description if you're looking for it there.
And that's teamhousepodcast.kit, KIT, Kilo India Tango.com /join.